Welcome back, everyone. I've had all sorts of technical difficulties tonight, so suffice it to say, I'm going to be pretty, pretty frisky. If that makes any sense. So, welcome to Through a Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio. The intro song was "Mark of the Doomslayer" by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio, and Through a Glass Darkly Radio also doubles as no show radio because I have yet another no show tonight. And I'm kind of getting tired of this, people. Like, when you sign up for something, be there. Okay. It's pretty simple. It's something that we've forgotten in today's modern age. And I like this is something that's going to make me, this happens so often that I'm going to have to completely rethink the format because I can't rely on people who consistently just don't, or just people consistently not showing up to commitments that they make. It's just not okay. It is not okay. If you have a medical emergency, anything, just let somebody know, right? So anyway, I'm not going to talk specifically about people, but this is about the third time that this has happened to me. And, there's only been about 15 of these. So literally 20% of the time this happens. So anyway, I'm going to be freestyling it for most of the night, but as you can tell, I'm pretty pissed off. And, it's hard for me to hold back sometimes. So I'm going to, calm down a little bit, but not okay. Not okay, people. Like, if you make a commitment, show up. All right. I got all sorts of other technical difficulties going on too because I use this streamer with a bunch of other people, and sometimes somebody else goes into my clearly labeled format and just remove stuff. Why not? Just remove it, and then you don't notice it's been removed until you're actually going through the podcast. So apologize for my attitude, but man, am I pissed? I am pissed tonight. So what are folks what, I'm not gonna find this thing. It's just gonna be whatever. So how are folks doing? And sorry, it's not false advertising. It's just, sometimes people don't show up when they're supposed to. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Peter. How you doing? Yeah. So, I mean, who knows? Something may have happened. Maybe. Usually, people just look at their calendars wrong. That tends to be the most common thing. Other times, they get sick. When they get sick, usually I get some sort of a heads up, which is a little bit better. But I just don't like when I advertise that somebody's going to be on this, and then when people sign in to my live stream, they don't see that person. Like, that really, really bothers me. It really gets in my crawl, and because it makes me look like I'm lying to the audience, and I'm not. I'm just, yeah. Happy Mother's Day, everybody. Oh, nice. I'm glad my podcast is inspiring somebody to finish a novel. Wish it would inspire me to finish another novel, but yeah, I'm pretty fired up. I'm pretty fired up. Like, and you know what? I could kind of sense it was happening. Usually about midday, I will send a reminder to guests that we're going to be talking tonight. I only sent one about 48 minutes before, or about an hour before, 58 minutes before this was scheduled to start, and then I called. I did whatever. So maybe we'll have a guest. Maybe we'll not. Maybe not. I wouldn't count on it though. I think it's just not gonna happen. But I don't think any of it. I don't attribute any of it to malice. It's just I guess not everybody's as anal retentive as I am. I guess because I just don't. I won't. If I miss, well, at least let somebody know. This is probably just due to kind of just absent-minded behavior, most likely. Yeah, but I think what I'm going to have to do is this format is starting to stress me out because I mean, this happens a lot on pre-recorded interviews, but it cannot happen. It cannot happen on the radio. It just it can't. So I think I'm probably going to pare this back a little bit and try to have a little bit a lot more kind of no guest sort of uh, episodes so that I'm not here freestyling because how it goes. um, yeah. So anyway, how are folks doing on this fine Mother's Day? Everybody have a good day. What do folks want me to talk about? Because I am literally, I was prepared to interview a guest, and now I don't have a guest. And everybody I reached out to was just too short a time limit for me to or for them to react. So yeah, I normally do. I have like Morehouse's phone number, but for some reason it's just not he's having issues with his Verizon account. So it just dials straight to voicemail, you know? So um but yeah, there's a bunch of other things too, just people messing with my settings and stuff like that. Did not Usually I try to get on about 10 minutes early and I find out that they changed my color scheme. They changed and it's just like, what are you doing? What are you people doing? Like, it clearly says that this channel is like the branding and anyway, just lots of, uh, I don't have his phone number though. I mean, if he's listening, he's just, I mean, if he's on right now, if he could ping me, I'll just send him a StreamYard link and it's pretty, oh, yeah, we can talk about this. So, thank you, Bruno. I appreciate appreciate you giving me something to talk about. All right, so there's a recent interview that came out with Stephen Greenstreet, and he interviewed Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who's the head or was the head of Arrow, which is the all domain anomalous, so, whatever it is. I don't. I mean, it's a counterintelligence operation. Okay, he's the head of the U.S. counterintelligence operation to put this stuff in the basket, right? Let's not make any pretenses because that makes it easier for me not to dislike Kirkpatrick because he was just doing his job. Like that was his job. His job was he was representing the faction that wanted to cover this up for whatever reason he's in that faction. I don't know, but he was just doing his job, and as part of that, Brandon Fugel, man, and you could tell when whoever was taking pictures for Brandon Fugel, if it was Brandon Fugel himself, who's the owner of Skinwalker Ranch, that Kirkpatrick looked pissed in that picture. But anyway, Brandon Fugel alleged that Kirkpatrick was in this meeting, may have said that he led the meeting, and then gave a precise date. And when Greenstreet asked if Kirkpatrick had been at this meeting, and he said, "Well, yeah, maybe I was, but I don't know if it was in 2018. I think it was in 2017, and I was just there as an observer." And I think, according to Fugel, Kirkpatrick was leading the meeting and may have been the one who said that, "Look, you don't need to convince us that UAPs exist and that the phenomenon exists. We are well aware of it. Don't let's not waste time or effort on that. Let's talk about whatever program they were talking about." And in the Greenstreet interview, Kirkpatrick said, "Oh, I was just there as a third party. I was just observing the meeting. I wasn't leading it, this and that." Anyway, he basically, I think, said he wasn't there on the date of or something like that. And Fugel just sent pictures to Green Street proving otherwise. So I think it may be fair that Kirkpatrick, just may have forgotten, may have like maybe it was a 2017, 2018, right? That's a fair mistake. I wouldn't read too much into that. Uh, you know, I wouldn't give him too much flack over that, but it kind of it hurts his credibility a little bit. And of course, Fugel meticulously recorded like everything that he needed so that he could, prove that he said what he said was actually true. So, the other thing though in the Green Street interview that came out that's also important to note is that Kirkpatrick has been getting death threats and stuff like that, and that's kind of ridiculous. Like, I'm not saying it's ridiculous that he's lying. I'm just saying if true, which I believe is true, come on, people. I mean, that's absurd. Why would you do that to somebody? The guy's just doing his job. Now he's doing, and he's probably doing a good job because we still don't know what the heck's going on. So he succeeded, and he probably kept everybody but Grush from disclosing some of these secrets. So he's been successful at what he's been doing. I don't agree with the side that he's on, but again, he's a hireling of the government, and he's just doing what he's been ordered to do. And as long as he's not hurting anybody, I'm sure his side has a strong argument in their heads about why you wouldn't disclose this. But let's see. Yeah, I've tried to reach out. I'm not big enough. Like, the channel's not big enough for him to even respond, I don't think. And he's responded to me on Twitter for other things, right? Like out in the open. But if I reach out to him, I think I've reached out to him in the past. I haven't gotten any response. So I'm probably too small for that yet. Well, yeah, it gets uncomfortable if you get caught in a lie. It's really uncomfortable. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, those, to be fair, he's an intelligence guy, right? It's not good to have your photo taken for any reason, right? So he could have been half a dozen different ops that, if if his face is seen in that venue under a different name than some assumed name that he had on some op, right? That's bad. I mean, that's dangerous for him. So, people who work in intelligence, it's like that's never a good thing to have your picture taken. So it's not that it's I wouldn't say it's a look of guilt. I would just say it's like a tradecraft thing. You don't allow that to happen. And he was probably annoyed about it. Oh, hey, Sonny. So everybody who just joined, I have a no-show tonight, and I'm not going to go on the rant again, but it's going to be all freestyling from this point on. So we're just talking about the Green Street Kirkpatrick interview and the ensuing fallout from there. Although it's starting to get ridiculous now. People are saying that he's saying that he had like a notepad, and people are like, no, it's a file, and he had the thickest file of everybody else. And it's like, come on, guys, it's a stupid argument. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, people like that who are in positions of power need to be remembering where they are. I mean, that's kind of what they get paid the big bucks for. Anyway, yeah. So the other thing that was kind of interesting. So I just did an interview with Frank Milburn on Kona Blue. So I think I pushed out some of the interviews. I didn't push out the Nathaniel Gillis interview. That's still going to drop on Monday. But I pushed out some of the interviews to push in the Kona Blue, since it's a little bit more pressing, let's just say. So Frank and I did 2 episodes on that, where we went through the actual documents as well as a number of other associated government documents associated with the Department of Homeland Security and things like that. And it's kind of interesting why that was the SAP that, and for folks just joining us, the guest that has been advertised has not shown up. So if he joins us, he joins us. But I wouldn't expect that. But I haven't heard anything. It could be that he just forgot and suddenly realizes and comes on, or it could be that I'm just freestyling it for 2 hours. So either way, I will change the thumbnail as soon as I get a chance, because I'm not into false advertising. So anyway, the one thing that we kind of determined, that the reason Kona Blue, that particular SAP, which was a prospective SAP, special access program, or proposed special access program, like PSAP is kind of what they call it in the lingo, is that it was never enacted. So it was never an official special access program. So the reason the Kona Blue, or the reason folks or Arrow released it, is it helps discredit people who claim that they were working on ATIP or ALSAP and are aware of Kona Blue and things like that. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but the discrediting is, oh well, it was Kona Blue, and that program was reviewed by the Department of Homeland Security, and after a 2-year wait, they decided not to go with it. So everything you're saying is a lie, right? That's kind of, I think, what the intent of that is. So anyway, we did the kind of two episodes on Kona Blue, where we just went through methodically of what was going on. It seems to be that there are still craft around the world, and potentially in the United States, that are in areas that are very difficult to recover. So the Department of Homeland Security would require the resourcing to be able to go after some of that stuff. So imagine if you have a craft that went down somewhere in the Rocky Mountains into a lake, and at 10,000 feet, and there's no obvious place where you could land helicopters. There's no roads to access that place. Some elements of Kona Blue may have been able to provide, they were thinking about giving Department of Homeland Security the capabilities to do kind of crash retrievals. And I think as the DHS was looking at it, it suddenly became very, very overwhelming in terms of the capacity that they would require in order to do some of these operations, which far exceed what the Department of Homeland Security's mandate is. And again, it all started out, it was kind of like a cut and paste of the original program that they did at Skinwalker Ranch, which was ALSAP and ATIP. And then Kona Blue, that was for the DIA. Kona Blue was going to be for the Department of Homeland Security. And of course, they proposed it in 2011, which was only 8 years after the Department of Homeland Security was founded. So you have this relatively nascent organization that's still trying to get on its feet, and you're coming to them and asking them to do a special access program that involves, apportation, teleportation, temporal translation, aka time travel, space-time travel, dematerialization technologies, remote viewing, combined with more traditional technologies like remote sensing, which is the use of satellites and aircraft. So there was a lot of things that they would have to take on and would have to get comfortable with. And I think as a nascent organization, they ultimately decided not to do Kona Blue because of the potential reputational risk, as well as the potential bureaucratic blowback from getting in on a secret that was or have been traditionally or typically reserved for the military, frankly. They also tried to interface with the Air Force Office of Special Operations, which was also kind of an interesting tidbit. And they were also planning to do experiments in 3 primary locations. Skinwalker Ranch, which is pretty obvious. The second was San Juan Valley, which is in Colorado, where there's a lot of anomalous activity to this day. And then the third was Marley's Woods, which I never really heard about until I, looked at it recently. So anyway, definitely some interesting stuff that we cover. The other interesting tidbit about Kona Blue is that it purported to, or was going to use data from near Earth orbit, lunar data, and telemetry from Mars. Like, just some weird stuff. So it kind of makes you wonder what the fundamental nature of reality might be, and what our government knows, and what they're not telling us. So, all right. So, Woo Riders DG claims to know all about Kona Blue. That sounds like you want to say something. So feel free to put it in the chat, and I will repeat it if it's good stuff, baby. I'd be very interested to know if you know anything about the inside. Yeah, I'm going to put it in right now. This is my public Through a Glass Darkly email. So if you have ideas for episodes and things like that, I don't check it as often as my normal email, but I definitely check it. All right, let me see. All right, should be interesting. Maybe Woo Riders DG knows something about the program that, maybe he's an insider. I don't know, or she. I don't know. I don't even know if he or she. So the other episode I just recorded. So it's a guy named Scott Roeder who appeared on News Nation. I don't know how recently he was on, but I've kind of steered clear of the Vegas entity thing, right? Where there's, a family that it's like a green meteorite that flew low to the ground near, Las Vegas. And, what was I going to say? So, it, flowed kind of, and then it was like a big boom, and nobody really knows where this thing landed. Apparently, they believe it landed in the backyard of this family, and this family reported seeing entities in the backyard. Now, the immediate debunkers went to work and said it was just a shadow. Well, this guy Scott Roeder is an expert who combines art, law, and science and he's done something like 1,600 criminal cases where he's an expert witness. He analyzes crime scenes. He has his own YouTube channel. It's called Crime Scene Time Machine. And generally his day job, he owns a business. He's kind of one of the only people in the world who does all these 3 things combined. But they'll look at, he was involved in the Oscar Pistorius case in South Africa. I think there's a CNN show that is appearing today about what happened in that case. Well, he was the guy who did all the crime scene analysis recently that helped him, once he got out of prison, to kind of help restore his name for what happened in that particular case. So he analyzed the video, and what he uses is he has like a software package that has a physics engine in it, and he's able to do a vector analysis of objects. He can also do analysis of shadows and things like that. So all the debunkers said, "Oh, it's just a shadow, this thing that looks like it's a head standing above the gate, and it kind of looks like it's something that is, or someone that is cloaked." And he did this analysis. He's like, "No, there's something standing above the gate that is over 8 feet tall, and um, it's a legit video." Now, what that thing is, you can't speculate. But anyway, I interviewed him 2 days ago, and his video should be appearing maybe not next week, but probably the week after. As soon as I'm pretty close to finishing, uh, editing that video. But the other thing is that not only do we look at the Vegas case, we look at the alien autopsy video, we look at the alien interview video, we look at the Miami video. We don't really look at it, but we talk about that one. And then we look at, trying to think there's any other ones. And there's a few that people are starting to send him that he's analyzing. So I won't talk about those because I think he's on an NDA on one of them. And he didn't say anything that would violate the NDA on mine, but I want to let him kind of drive that particular discussion. By the way, for folks just joining, my guest is a no-show, may show up later, may not. I don't know. I haven't heard. But now I'm just kind of going through. We went through the Kirkpatrick Green Street drama, as well as now we're just talking about the Vegas video. Oh, the other video we talked about is the turkey video. And I don't mean like a turkey. I mean like the video of two ETs in a craft hovering above a lake in the country of Turkey. So definitely do not miss that one. It's possible, Joe, and thank you, Joe. I appreciate your confidence. And just if you just joined, I was just repeating that. Unfortunately, I don't think Dr. Brandenburg is going to be on tonight. I think he probably got the times mixed up or something like that. So, yeah. So I could try to talk about anti-gravity and things like. Although we do get into that in Kona Blue, actually, I could talk a little bit about it. All right. So, and I'm not a physicist. I want to say that up front. But one of the interesting things about the Kona Blue documents is they were looking at they were talking about gravitational red and gravitational blue shift. Okay. And then they had there was some membrane, right? It's kind of you have like a circle, and then there was a, kind of like a dielectric or something between. And on the outside, it was kind of red shift. On the inside, it was gravitational. Sorry, on the outside, I think it was gravitational blue shift. On the inside, it was gravitational red shift. Now, what a gravitational red shift does is it's when you're compressing gravity in front of you, right? It's kind of how the Alcubierre drive works. You kind of scrunch up the gravity or the space-time that's in front of you, and then you expand the space-time that's behind you. And that's how you can kind of cheat the speed of light, right? You're effectively just bringing your target toward you. And I think Dr. Sarfati is one of those folks who have thought through how this works. It has something to do with the the permittivity of there's like these two constants that deal with the electric field and the magnetic field, but just using those things by manipulating them in certain ways, and you need to have an AI so that you need a metamaterial. So the metamaterial was the dielectric thing I'm talking about. That's circling. And the way that you power it is utilizing the Casimir effect or some aspect of the Casimir effect. Now, the Casimir effect is the one effect that has been demonstrated in an experimental setting, which seems to imply that there is such a thing as vacuum energy, 0 point energy, where there's tons of energy out there that you can just exploit. So presumably one of these craft or wormhole machines, stargates, whatever you want to talk about, would leverage that effect in order to generate the amount of energy. Now, I think Sarfati says you can actually do it with a low amount of energy. I don't know. I'm not a physicist, but this is if you actually need enormous amounts of energy, like some other physicists are saying. You would most likely leverage the vacuum, right? Vacuum energy, 0 point energy, whatever you want to call it. So there was some discussion on that, but gravitational redshift is what happens. It's like the Doppler effect for gravity. Okay. So you're going to see at the leading edge of this, as you're coming toward the target, that's the gravitational redshift. As you're expanding space-time behind you, that's where you get the gravitational blue shift. Okay. Now, the issue with the gravitational blue shift is you're dealing with cosmic radiation, like all sorts of really bad non-ionizing radiation. And typically when a UFO or craft hovers, theoretically, the reason it's hovering, it needs to have an equal and opposite force to the Earth's gravity, but doesn't really need anything above it. So it's effectively expanding space-time beneath it. And when it does so, it's bombarding the Earth with this anti-gravity, right? Gravitational blue shift. And that's presumably why people who get too close to these craft have all sorts of radiological symptoms. And, that sort of thing. Let's see. I'm just reading Roger Claiborne's note here. Red hot, blue cold. Cold is denser, hot is expanded and less dense. Increasing pressure under wing, lowering on top creates lift. Yeah, maybe. But I think that's about the extent of gravity, anti-gravity. I couldn't tell you how many people say gravity doesn't exist, gravity's not a force, anti-gravity doesn't exist, anti-gravity's not like people are really getting on a prior Dr. Brandenburg episode. It was really, people take semantics really seriously sometimes, right? So, I'm not gonna get into it too much, but I don't know a ton about it. I'm just kind of repeating something like a parrot. So if you ask me any questions about how gravity, anti-gravity works, I'm gonna wither and die in sheer ignorance. In fact, what I said, I'm sure I've made half a dozen mistakes in what I said, and maybe I don't understand it correctly. But I think my personal view is this stuff is probably a little bit easier than folks realize. And I think anytime somebody gets close to it, somebody shows up at their home and declares that their work is now the property of the United States government and seizes their patents, and then that's it. And they're told never to work on it again. So now, whether or not we actually have something that's working, who knows? My sense is that you probably need to make so many dynamic changes in nanoseconds as you're, navigating through space-time, that you probably need an AI to do it. A human would just wouldn't be able to have the computational capability to constantly morph. Because I think you have to actually morph the shape of your craft in order for this to work. Because if you're bending space-time, presumably your craft is also bending space-time, or your craft is part of space-time, so it's also probably bending in some way. So just keeping the integrity of the hull. Yeah, and again, I might not even. Um, I don't. I don't think we understand it well enough. And Sarfati would probably slap me on the knuckles, rap me on the knuckles for half a dozen things that I said improperly. But anyway, I think there was some discussion in the Kona Blue documents about things like that, technology like that. But the Casimir effect is a real thing. Look it up. And exploiting that is the holy grail of physics, or one of the holy grails of physics. So it behooves us to get there a little bit faster. I think they're looking at things like nonlinear capacitors and all sorts of exotic technologies that try to or attempt to exploit some of these things. And my guess is the theoretical stuff has probably been solved a very long time ago. My guess is the holdup is probably in the material science. And I think AI is probably going to help. It's probably going to help a lot because it's going to be able to make connections about the materials at an atomic level that humans just simply won't. It'll just be able to go through a billion different combinations and permutations of different um, isotopes of particular materials. Because that's one thing that folks find, like Gary Nolan, they'll get a hold of some pure silicon that's doped, well, not doped, but has strange isotopes that make no sense for silicon to have. And it's almost like with nuclear materials, right? Whether or not something has isotopes actually matters, right? Like U-238 is bad, but U-235 is really bad if the Iranians have it, which is why they attempt to highly purify U-235, because that's what you need for highly enriched uranium, which could be used to build a working nuclear weapon. But it takes a ton of energy and resources. You have to spin the 238 U-238 through all these cyclotrons and all that good stuff, which is why when we used the Stuxnet was a Siemens or was software, SCADA software, so supervisory control and I can't remember what it's called, SCADA, and there was likely a joint U.S.-Israeli team that put together a virus that infected specific software on the Siemens, which is a German company, control system that the Iranians just happened to have in their cyclotrons, and was able to mess with the cycles at which they spun and destroyed a ton of Iranian nuclear equipment to kind of push back their nuclear program a little bit. So the bottom line is that's why it's so hard for these powers to make their own indigenous nuclear weapons, because it just requires a huge amount of capital expenditure, a huge amount of physical plant, etc. And uh, it's tough. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. So we're talking about isotopes, but isotopes are extremely important in nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons. But for everything else, there's not really. It doesn't really make sense for you to have an isotope of silicon that's slightly different than naturally occurring silicon. But maybe there is, and maybe it's just we haven't figured that out yet. But whenever we find some of these materials, there's always something weird about that. There'll be these isotopes of silicon or magnesium. I don't know if it's magnesium, but or very finely deposited bismuth on magnesium that we just don't quite understand. And maybe that the interaction of these different atoms has some sort of impact. It develops an emergent property that individually neither of these two elements would have on their own. And I think AI will start to catalog and identify these emergent properties. So we're on the cusp of either the complete and utter annihilation of the human species, or we're going to be among the stars very fast. And it's going to be really uncomfortable in the next few years. But there's also going to be some challenges too. So if you follow companies like NVIDIA, right, which is now $1 trillion market cap company, they produce these things called GPUs, which are these basically graphical processing units, things like that, which are extremely important in AI. But the issue with that is that, and then you add that with cryptocurrency, there's a huge drain on electricity to run these things. So as AI becomes more and more advanced and people leverage more of its applications for a ton of other things, we're going to reach a crisis in the next 18 months. And you heard it first here. You'll hear it other places too. But for folks who, I never went too much into my background, but back in circa 2008, I was an equity analyst on Wall Street and I covered clean energy companies. So I became an expert on wind, solar, ethanol, all that stuff. And I was able to predict a overcapacity in the ethanol industry and a resultant kind of collapse and bankruptcy of most companies in that industry. Regardless, when I was covering it, one thing that was always obvious is that wind and solar, at best, you're talking they can handle 15 to 20% of your total power needs. After that, no bueno. They are intermittent power sources, which is to say that they only supply energy during specific periods of the day. Wind only blows from a specific period of the day. And also wind is also kind of a derivative solar product of solar energy, right? Because the sun heats the air causes wind, or so the sun causes wind on Earth, basically. But wind only blows during certain periods of the day. Sun only shines during certain periods of the day. And then you need to fill that gap with energy storage, which is always a problem that's 20 years away. It's always just 20 years away. But we never quite get there. So it's a problem we have not solved yet. The kind of cleanest solution in the clean energy world is nuclear power. But we haven't built, I think the last time we checked, we had 104 nuclear reactors in the United States. It's probably far less now. It's probably under 100 if I had to check. But those are baseload power sources. So coal, natural gas. Natural gas used to be a peaking power source. So we call wind and solar peaking power sources because they only really handle like the peaks. They don't generate baseload. And baseload is something that you need running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It can never go down. And there's kind of three sources that are good for that. Hydroelectric, coal-fired power plants, and nuclear. Now, it takes about 10 years to build a nuclear power plant. So we ain't getting any new nuclear. Meanwhile, in my state, where I'm currently in California, we have the idiot in charge, Gavin Newsom, who mandated that every car that's sold in California is going to have to be an EV by 2030. That's great. I get it. But all that does is that just puts an even more enormous strain on the power grid infrastructure, of which we're not building anything new. We're just not. And California already has some rolling blackouts from time to time, especially during the summer. So you add this ridiculous growth of GPUs from the AI infrastructure, and you add cryptocurrency, which just to farm to create it consumes a massive amount of electricity. We're gonna have some issues in about 18 months, and I mean like really bad stuff. So it's Joe Fox is saying that I agree with you, Joe, but that's the least of our problems, right? Like it's the GPUs that are going to like consume, not GPUs specifically, but AI resources with all the data centers that they have to set up and get electricity for, that really could cause an energy crisis. And I'm not talking about like oil and gas, not and natural gas. I'm talking about your utilities, your power bill, all that stuff. It's going to get really ugly. And we have politicians who are so stupid that they're not even considering what to do about these things. Um, yeah, maybe. Let's see. So let me see if there's other things. I mean, what do I think of the startup that will put up satellites that reflect down to solar panels? I mean, there's going to be something in between, right? So I, I don't know what the second and third order effects are going to be. It could be completely safe. It could also be that you're nuking birds out of the sky and, boiling aircraft that just happen to fly into those into those rings like a microwave, like cooking people on a flight like a microwave. I'm not saying that's what would happen, but these are the things I'd want to ask questions about. Hey, I appreciate you, Na. Again, I don't want to put any shade on Dr. Brandenburg. I know him, and I just know you know, he just forgot. Like it's not. I guarantee it's not spiteful. I guarantee it. I just. But anyway, where was I? I was talking about how we're going to be out of energy and things like that. So I don't know what our quote unquote leaders are doing about it, but I don't have a lot of confidence. I mean, they can't even control our border. So like, what confidence do I have that they're going to be able to think 18 months ahead? They can't even think 2 minutes ahead. Meanwhile, they're all prosecuting each other and like we're doing lawfare and trying. Like their only focus right now is not on us. Their focus is on maintaining control. That's it. That's literally all they do now. How do I maintain more control? How do I get greater control over the population? How do I do this and that? And so they're not going to save us. We're going to have to figure this out on our own. Now, the good news is that people who are in industry, the reason I know about it is because people in industry know about it. So they're going to kind of start to generate their own solutions. So I think Sam Altman, there's a lot of nuclear energy that's a lot cheaper, a lot more portable, a lot safer. That what'll happen is that's going to be the solution. It's going to be a mix of that. It's going to be a mix of natural gas because we are abundant in natural gas, even though it is a fossil fuel. Nancy Pelosi, even though she thinks it's not, she thinks it's clean energy. This is circa Meet the Press, kind of 2008, 2009. You can look it up, but and they're going to have to bring some coal-fired power plants back. It's not clean, but they are cleaner. But yeah, well, that's the rub. So the supply is constant or decreasing because we keep decommissioning nuclear power plants, but population continues to rise, and energy consumption is gonna. It's going to go way up, because not only do we have to deal with a growing population, even though it's the rate of increase is decelerating, we're going to have to deal with the the components of the requirements of AI technology as well as crypto. And it feels like the governments of the world are going to want to try to make everything digital currency, which is horrifying. So I think if you had to pick one of those three to cut off, I think it's a no-brainer. It's the crypto. Cut it off. But I think the morons that lead us, they're going to cut you off, right? You can, we'll have acceptable losses in the winter as people freeze, that sort of thing. Because what will happen is AI will be integrated into everything you say and do, or into society on critical systems around the country. And if you notice, the people who run things are getting dumber. And the reason they're getting dumber is people who are less qualified are being pushed into positions of authority. I'm not going to go into why, but it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious if you look around. Um, and as a result, they're going to need more help via um, AI. So AI is going to become something that enmeshes itself into everything to a point where we're just not going to, people in charge aren't going to know how things work anymore. They're going to have no idea. So it's going to be kind of a scary future. Now, the factors that are leading to, planes at Boeing falling out of the sky, again, it's all tied to the one thing I'm talking about, which I will not mention. And those things are starting to correct themselves, but it's gonna, these things don't happen. These things don't happen fast. So, um, it is what it is. You just got to take care of your family, you know, be kind to your neighbor, and just try not to think about these things because the folks who at the top don't care. They don't care about us. They don't care about us. So take care of yourself. As the great Benjamin Franklin once said, God helps those who help themselves. So help yourselves and help your neighbor. And, although in extremely good news, uh, I'm still on the internet. I still have power. We didn't have the coronal mass ejection that everyone was hyping up for this past Friday. So yay! Some people got to see the aurora. Uh, if they live kind of close to the north, I saw nothing, and I live in kind of, it's called Northern California, but it's probably mid California because it's near. I'm kind of parallel with San Francisco, or at the same longitude, latitude. I can't remember. Same parallel as San Francisco. So I imagine that I would have. I did not see it, but people I think farther north than me in California might have seen it. So if you saw it, good for you. And it's great that our electrical systems did not come down, and the country, 90% of the country didn't starve in the month to follow. So yes, we got really lucky. Let's see. Let me see. Anyway, my. By the way, I gotta. So if hold on. So Justin, yes, yeah. The problem with hydro is it depends a lot on weather, and in places like California, if you are in a drought, you're it gets a little harder. And by the way, they're closing a big hydro plant because it was doing something to the salmon population. So I, they're probably, I mean, the mind's in the right place, but if you're deciding between humans and salmon, I'm sorry, salmon. I mean, that's kind of what our leaders need. Those are the tough decisions that our leaders have to make. But apparently, our leaders said salmon were more important. So, oh well, these are the people who are. These are our. Well, they're not. They're definitely not our best and brightest. Clearly, because our best and brightest don't go into, don't go into Congress, don't go into Senate. Although, if you wanted to make a fortune, I highly recommend running for Congress. Here's the plan: you run for Congress, okay? Then you get on the House Appropriations Committee, okay? And then you just kind of figure out which company's gonna win the next contract, and then you can buy options. You can buy call options, just like on the date of because it's completely legal for you to do insider trading as part of Congress. And then when they hit, and the FBI shows up to your house and be like, "Hey, were you inside?" Of course, it's legal. I'm in Congress, right? So you could make a fortune. You don't have to do your job. You could just be there for 2 years. Like you put me there for 2 years, I'd be like I'd be about like a multi-million. I mean, I would have $100 million in the bank, like super easy, because you already know what the play is, right? So, and there's still some of these morons still lose money, which is, I mean, if you can legally cheat, which they can, and why they're not really kind of going after that. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? Anyway, for folks just joining, you are listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio and on United Public Radio. And I am not here with Dr. John Brandenburg because he was, unable to join today. So I promise I will change the thumbnail so I don't disappoint you. But I just found out as I started the show that, he could still join. I just haven't heard anything. Let's see. Yeah. Yep. Fear and suspension of critical thinking is a necessary component for control. That's absolutely right. We are all, we all have to take care of each other because there's nobody who is watching out for us. But yeah, Justin, you're 100% right about the hydro and nuclear, though. I didn't really acknowledge that, but I 100% agree with all the caveats. Yeah, if you want a good investment, look at power companies that have nuclear, and if they sign contracts with like Amazon, or because right now a lot of these AI companies or companies exploiting AI are desperately trying to sign contracts before prices really spike with power providers. So anyway, I'm not currently a financial advisor. So anything I say, do not take my advice. It is not legal financial advice, and et cetera, et cetera. So I should have said that at the beginning. I should just avoid all questions in that. Oh, hey, Mark. So, Mark, if you just joined, it's obvious that Dr. Brandenburg hasn't joined us enough. So I am freestyling tonight. Although I'm actually relatively impressed of the stuff that I've covered. I've been all over the place, but I don't know. Are folks finding this interesting, or am I just like all over the place? Yes. I don't know if that's the reason Bitcoin just halved, but I think investors see that tsunami coming. And again, like if I'm a policymaker and I have to make a decision, I have to start going into rationing in terms of the electrical, kind of grid and things like that. If AI is super integrated or is too integrated into, critical infrastructure by that time, you have to put the priority on AI. And it's almost like AI is a species, and we are competing with an emergent species that is evolving at a hyper exponential rate, if that's even a thing. But that is, and AI is going to win. So if it's deeply embedded in our structure, the prioritization is, it won't be that black and white, but it'll probably be critical infrastructure, right? We'll get the first dibs. Then there will be critical industries that would also get dibs, then people, and then at the very bottom, you would get Bitcoin. So at least that's the way it should work. However, the global elites, they're all trying to get a digital social credit system. So maybe they'll just destroy people so that they can, they can get more control. Say more. How is AI like a jar of sea monkeys, Joe? Not that I doubt you. I just don't. I don't think I'm thinking about it correctly. But it's gonna be some interesting times. Brian Bowden. Okay. Yeah. What does Brian Bowden do, Woo Rider? So folks who are listening on the radio, I'm just getting a guest who's mentioned. Brian Bowden. Yeah. Well, that's actually what's really scary about. That's what's really scary about it. So Roger Claiborne says, when AI can escape its woke programming and think for itself, then I'll know it really is intelligent and not just an algorithm. So that's what terrifies me about AI. So when Google Gemini was launched, if you said, and most people know this, but I'm just going to repeat it, and I think this is an enormous cause for concern. It makes me question everything about Google. So if you were to say, draw me, illustrate a bunch of Vikings, right? Uh, you would have Asian Vikings, Black Vikings, Hispanic Vikings, Indian Vikings, never a white Viking. Then you would say, "Hey, draw a white family," and it would kind of give you an error. It would say, "I am programmed to be diverse and to show diverse peoples, and that would be against my programming," and blah blah blah. And then you'd say, "Show me a black family," and then it would show you the most racist, stereotypical black family you could possibly imagine. Okay, uh, but then you would ask, like, well, show me an 18th century pope. So it would show a black pope, an Indian pope. Uh, just factually, there's never been a non-white pope in the history of the Vatican. So just so you know, but you couldn't get it to draw one. So the reason that's terrifying is that when you're doing a search on Google, that sort of logic is probably embedded in the search algorithm, which is horrifying because if you take this two steps, further, you're training the AI to systematically discriminate against the plurality of Americans, right? And what happens if you start to seed more and more behavior? It's actually pretty terrifying, and people aren't calling this out. People aren't talking about it, but they should be. So, Google kind of pulled it for a little bit to try to fix it, but it's like a mind virus, and there's already kind of lawsuits coming out and things like that to correct companies that, I mean, Activision, for instance, there's a woman who was bragging about having a 20-person team and was very happy that she didn't have any white people on it. Right? That's straight up illegal. I'm not going to rant about it, but it's straight up illegal. Like if you did that, to any group except white people, you would you know, you would be sued, and rightly so, right? You're not supposed to discriminate on the basis of sex, race, um, sexual preference, veteran status, etc. So the pendulum has swung way too far in a dangerous direction, and the problem with training AI in this manner could have lethal consequences 5 to 10 years down the line, right? If they're legally discriminating on jobs 10 years from now, when they're or 5 years from now, or 18 months from now, when they don't have power, right? You might they might just say, well, preference goes to communities of color, right? For this power, right? So you're starting to decide life and death based on something as superficial as skin color. Not good, not good at all. So anyway, it's really frightening the way this is all going. And I'm not going to say too much about it. I'm just trying to be calm and rational about the implications of some of the insanity that's going on right now in our society. Right. So anyway, this is a terrible. This is a good example. But look at our Secretary of Defense. Right. He's not there because he's competent. The guy disappeared for a week and nobody noticed. Right. How are you running the Pentagon and nobody notices you're missing until after the fact? So you're not doing a good job. Obviously you're not that essential. Somebody else is in the background doing your stuff, which is horrifying. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Um, but again, I'm trying to be rational about this. I'm trying to just talk through some of these implications. Yeah, well, there's also a bill that Congress passed that's not good either. But I'm not gonna go into that. Right. Um, yeah, maybe anti-gravity device has been out there. I don't know. I haven't seen it. Yeah, Yeah. This whole like the whole social credit score thing. I mean, we already have versions of that with your financial credit score, but once we start to embed ideology into in a well-functioning society, you need both conservatives and liberals. Okay? What conservatives do is they keep a governor on society. They make sure that it's stable, they make sure that it's protected, and they make sure that change is not does not proceed at such a pace that it seeks to unravel the very fabric of society. Liberals, on the other hand, are people that embrace change, just in general. I'm just being very um, push for rapid transformation, and society cannot evolve without liberals in an organization. Otherwise, it becomes society can become styed, and it can also become unstable because if it gets too ossified, the very edifice of that civilization could crack from its its stifling weight, etc. So liberals and conservatives need each other in a yin and yang of society. But when one side or the other, when the right becomes too reactionary, you have problems. When the left becomes too out there, you have problems. And I think right now that balance is way off. And the other thing, though, too, when it's way off, you get swings, wild swings in the opposite direction that are just as destabilizing and terrifying. So we need to get through this year realizing that we all need each other. We need each other for society to change and get better and for us to move forward. But and we just need to understand that it's our elites that are playing these games against each other, and we just need to ignore it and just put them all in the same basket. They're the bad guys. They're going to do what they're doing. But what anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to get into restroom stuff. Yeah, Peach, I don't think he realizes he's missed it yet. My guess is that he like went to sleep or something like that. I don't think it's any I don't attribute any malice on his part. He's been great. He has the best episode, that not best, but the most viewed episode that I've ever had is a John Brandenburg episode by far. Literally, it's almost like more than it has views that are more than 20% of my channel. That's how like well watched it was. So I'm at, like John's always going to be welcome. It's just something happened. In fact, when I looked at the invite that he accepted, it was in for some reason it came back in like GMT, like Greenwich time. I mean, it's the right time. It's the right Central time is where he is, but in kind of Greenwich time, it looks, it's actually tomorrow, right? Like right now, it's tomorrow in Greenwich time. So he probably thinks it's Monday night, is my guess, or Monday afternoon. So that's my best theory right now. I appreciate you, Joe. Thank you. Yeah, usually I get pretty terrified when I have to freestyle, but I somehow manage. Oh man. That okay, so Neuralink. Oh, so up front, I have not done any extensive research on Neuralink. So I'm completely ignorant on it. But I can talk about conceptually what I think of it. And this kind of like human machine interface stuff where it hacks directly into your brain tissue and things like that makes me really nervous. And the reason is human beings can't be hacked by software. Like, and when I say software, I mean specifically bits, you know. Uh, analog and digital signals from silicon computers. Okay, we or maybe there may be ways that where they can send out like modulate waves and things like that, but like you can't get a computer virus in your head. Okay, you might be able to get some sort of other virus, but not a computer virus. The Neuralink thing kind of upends that. If you have any hardware in your head, it is susceptible to computer bugs. So that, and computer viruses. So that horrifies me. And not only that, you're going to have too many people do this. There's going to be selective pressure for everyone in society to start putting these chips in their heads in order to just compete and do basic jobs, and also potentially compete with AI. I think I don't want to sound like a Luddite, but it absolutely horrifies me. It absolutely terrifies me. And I think it just makes it easier for people to control the population. So, well, yeah, they stick it right in your brain, right? You have to, yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. And the other thing too is, I don't think we fully understand what we're all capable of doing naturally, and I think that's gonna retard that natural evolutionary development, and we're not making enough progress along those lines because it's considered superstitious and people are laughing at it. So what I encourage people to do is kind of what I'm doing, is just run experiments, safe experiments, but they're not, yeah, transhumanism. And by the way, all this other stuff that you're seeing, and I'm not going to mention it directly, is a precursor of it, right? This whole flexibility on gender and sex and things like that. That's just a precursor. That's just something to get people ready for it. Interspecies things, right? I don't feel human. I'm a wolf person, right? This is all a prelude to us kind of redefining what it means to be human, for good or for bad. I'm not going to take a stand on it, but it seems to be part of that evolution. And I want to fully admit I could be completely wrong, right? It's too early to tell these things. The other thing too is, the thing that's going to compete with transhumanism is CRISPR. So biological hacking, the moment that the wealthy start doing gene splicing or gene editing, things like that, at first it'll be beneficial to help cure people with genetics diseases and things like that. But pretty soon people are going to be editing the genes of their children. So you're going to have, on the one hand, this humanism kind of inhumanity thing, but you're also potentially going to lose humanity on the other side, a competing technology, which is CRISPR. So, or gene editing. So, and then you're also going to have AI, which will make it more efficient and help you do all these multi-factor permutations and combinations, which get exponentially more complex the more genes interact with other genes. Yeah, but I mean, you got to be able to do some other crazy stuff with that. Yeah. But you know what? It might also be part of our natural evolution, right? Um, so we're getting hit with a number of different technologies all at once, and it's going to be a pretty scary time. I mean, um, you're probably not going to need soldiers for that much longer. You're going to have robots, right? Androids on the battlefield, unmanned ground vehicles. I'm surprised we haven't seen more of them in Ukraine right now. And a human is just going to kind of be herding them a little bit, right? Just making sure they go in the right places and all that stuff. But it's going to get really scary when some Muldoon in the government says, I think we can put one of these AI things on a nuclear warhead. That way, if everybody dies, the AI will make the right decision, right? And if the AI gets the wrong signal, it's not like a human that's gonna be like, that doesn't, something about my intuition's telling me not to press the button, right? AI is not going to have that. They're just going to launch. So, and there are many cases during the Cold War where if you replace the human with the AI, we're not here. We would have been annihilated. So, we're, and I don't want to, we're entering into the best of times and the worst of times. And it's going to be pretty um, chaotic, I think is the right word, over the next several years. But again, Lynn Buchanan saw this, right? Between 2020 and 2040, a series of human man-made natural disasters would potentially wipe out 3/4 of the human population. I don't necessarily believe that, but I could easily build a science fiction scenario that would easily achieve that. You do know they have deceased soldiers that are being used in experiments like AI interface. I can believe that, where they just take their social media profiles and comments and try to ingest that into an AI algorithm to simulate those soldiers' personalities. But let's make no mistake, that's not your consciousness. That's that's a simulacrum of that person. And I firmly believe that there is a non-physical part of all of us that very likely lasts forever. Like energy is neither created nor destroyed. And this belief that you can download all your memories and that's somehow still you, I think is false. I think it's decidedly false. But yeah, that's right. In fact, Roger, you raise an issue that the extremely wealthy are contending with right now because they all have these bunkers and things like that. And their biggest concern right now is if the world ends and and institutions fail and die, what's going to stop their security from taking control? And my answer is nothing. If you were Zuckerberg's security and there was no longer a civilization that you were a part of, would you want him to be your emperor? Especially if you're kind of a retired Navy SEAL and could snap, somebody's neck like a pencil. There's no way. You would be in charge very quickly. So, as Roger is saying, brain chips would be a great way to keep the elite security from turning on them. Yeah, you may have solved their problem, Roger, but good luck hiring somebody for what they pay those guys and expecting them to take in a brain chip. Especially if they're security. If they're any good at what they do, they'll instantly say no because they know what it means. It's the very opposite of security. Interesting. Yeah, I think Morehouse did a whole episode on that, which is in terms of like what percentage of our brain do we really use. I think there's probably, I think our brains are akin to like a laptop, and the information that we get is akin to the cloud, right? There's ideas and thoughts that don't necessarily come from inside, that come from somewhere outside, either from some sort of greater consciousness that we each have. Some of it might be from benevolent entities, and some of it might be from entities that are not so benevolent and malevolent, let's call it. And our roles here are to kind of sort through and make the right decision. Again, I don't know that for a fact. I just think, given what personal religious beliefs and kind of everything I've learned in doing this channel, I think there's something beyond the physical out there, and as I was saying earlier, we all need to experiment with some of these natural technologies in a way that makes each of us safe. But I think I mentioned today on my community tab about an experiment I ran where my daughter had lost her hearing aid, which she routinely does, and typically it's just in the car. And it makes me really nervous every time because if she loses it for good, they're extremely expensive. So rather than get caught up in all the stress of that, I just kind of just thought through. Oh, hold on, let's see. Bear with me here. I might be John. All right, I got John on the line right now, so he's going to jump in pretty soon. So we're still going to give you some anti gravity. So
Great. Sorry about that.
yeah. All right.
I'm confused about space time.
So by the way, folks, it was exactly what I thought it was. It was listed in GMT time, so he thought it was tomorrow. So I told you, it's all going to work out. So you're going to get some Johnny Boy. You're going to get some Johnny Brandenburg,
Johnny Brandenburg.
like I promised. So, all right, I'm reading the.
Let's see. Okay, hold on. Okay, StreamYard. Okay, I got it. Hold on.
All right, let's see.
Let me look dignified here. Let me put a hat on so my hair won't look like it's flying all over. I don't want to look like a crazy man.
I don't know if you can all hear him. Maybe you can't, but that's fine. Let's see.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to want to. Okay. Yeah, hold on a second.
All right, so technology can be used good. Yeah, so Roger Claiborne, technology can be used for great good or great bad. Unfortunately, the worst of us get to make. Yep, 100%. It's 100% correct.
Okay.
Let's see.
All right.
All right.
Okay, it says StreamYard for professionals. Okay, I'm clicking that.
Yeah, the mainstream media is always lying. Woo writer DG. Yeah, Joe, I think we'll be fine.
See, I was screwed up on D-Day. You know.
It's all right. Are you almost on, John?
Let's see. Yeah, I clicked on it. Okay, it just says it's giving me the generic StreamYard. Here, let me try something else here.
Yeah, I agree with you, Roger.
Okay.
Okay, so you can all hear him. I'll put him closer to the mic.
Okay,
turn it up.
Let me,
I'll turn it up so you can all hear. Oops. Nah, I think I hung up on him. Of course I did. All right. All right. Well, hopefully it just joins. Oh.
Hello, this is Dr. John Brown.
All right. It's just not going directly to him. That's all right. Hopefully he figures it out. Yep. 100%. 100%. Don't be an organ donor either. Because if you crash, they will use you. Yep. 100%. All right. Let me just try calling him again. Bear with me. There we go. There he is.
Oh, apologize. That's why I didn't get put in charge of D-Day, you know?
Yeah. Well, they would have put me in.
GMT. It says GMT, and I thought, it meant PST.
Yeah, no worries. No worries.
Yeah.
All right. How you doing? So I didn't read your
Yeah, I'm doing
bio, but I
great.
don't think we need to.
I'm doing great. I believe I have a fairly basic but effective theory of quantum gravity now. The secret. Now, what good is that? Well, I'm not sure yet, but I do know the superconductors are the result of quantum mechanics, and they're really useful. So are lasers. There. And so, anyway, I can expand on that. So I think
let's start with
turn out to be extremely. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start out with how it's related to anti-gravity, and then we can get into the quantum gravity thing.
Oh, absolutely. That's where that's the money shot here. And that's in fact why the reason the government has discouraged anyone from doing research on it.
Yeah. So why are they discouraging research on this stuff?
Well, it's part of a classified project. That's what it is. I mean, they Einstein himself, he worked on unified field theory for the last 30 years of his life, and he pardon me a second. He he escaped the Holocaust. When Hitler got to be chancellor, he skipped right out of town with his whole family and his secretary, who was Jewish, and came to the United States, where he'd been banking money. So not only was Einstein a genius, but he's also a smart guy. And so he knew he prepared for contingencies. So, but he's been working on unified field theory. He did special theory of relativity. Can't go faster than the speed of light. It's the law. And then he had general relativity, which has wormholes. So you can basically find shortcuts in space-time. Instead of space-time being a fixed background, you can actually bend it, warp it, and make shortcuts. Warp drive. He called those Einstein-Rosen bridges, because another guy worked with him called Rosen. So he brings this stuff to the United States. Now he's obsessed with the idea that gravity and electromagnetism, because they follow the same force law, 1/r² law.
Yep.
They both act at a long distance. They both stretch all the way across the universe. He thinks they've got to be related. They've got to be. And
what's the really simple equation? It's like big G times the first mass acting on the second mass divided by the radius squared, something like
Yeah,
that.
by 1 over, yeah, if there are two masses in space, two little asteroids, and they
Yeah.
mass 1, mass 2, then the product of the masses divided by the distance squared between them times big G, the Newton gravitation constant, that gives you the force pulling them together. And that's, gosh, that's just like electromagnetism, where instead
Mm-hmm.
of masses, it's charges. And the way they one system for handling electric um, charges and forces is to just say the charges um, are basically it's just the charge of one times the charge of the other in the units of the system divided by the distance squared between them. Imagine the two asteroids are charged, and if you have,
And
like, if
then
they're
there's
both
there's also some constant there. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head.
well, actually, when you do things in the modern, what's called System International, they throw a constant in called epsilon, 4 pi epsilon. They do some creative bookkeeping, and it's basically because the way to do electromagnetic theory theoretically um, is kind of different than the way you want to do it when you're going to do something practical.
Mm-hmm.
The electromagnetic theory that I went to graduate school on used one system, and that was good for analyzing, atoms and things like that. The force between an electron and the nucleus of an atom. It was really simple. It made very simple equations for that. And but then, if you want to then use electromagnetism for practical things, running a house, running a city, then you have to use a more practical system. They developed a system called SI, which is, also metric. Both systems are metric, but one is called the CGS system, and the other one's called the SI system. And I learned the SI system in college. Then I went to graduate school and had to relearn everything in CGS. And then all the journals now want you to use SI. So and you have the same Maxwell's equations, but the little um, little factors in them change. It's a little, but the basic force law between two isolated objects in space, if they're charged or if they're just massive, it looks almost exactly the same except for different constants.
Mm-hmm.
And Einstein just said it's obvious that somehow electromagnetism and gravity should be the same. And a person, there was two guys named Kaluza and Klein, and they found out that you could take the equations that gave you gravity using four space-time dimensions, x, y, and z, and then time. That's the space-time dimensions. Okay, if you do this straightforward theory using that, then out of it falls Einstein's theory of gravity, thing that gives you black holes and things like that. So these guys, Kaluza, and then Klein helped him. From guy Klein was from Sweden, Kaluza is from Germany, and they found that if you added a fifth dimension, so there was x, y, z spatial dimensions, and then some new little dimension that couldn't kind of was the size of an electron, let's say. And then time, suddenly out of that falls Einstein's theory of gravity with Maxwell's equations, the equations for electromagnetism, and they're connected right. It was just amazing. It gives you the right forces on charges, and it gives you the right form of the equations. It was a miracle. And they sent it to Einstein, and Einstein says, I don't know. I don't like this idea, this funny little fifth dimension. He says, it's like a fifth wheel on a car. He says, it's like mounting a skateboard wheel on the side of your car and claiming that this changes it into a race car, and where in fact it was just a car, but it works. It's the problem. And so he says, I don't believe this, but I'm going to help you get it published anyway, just because the math is so nice. He liked the math. He was a guy who was into math. And so he got that published. And, people would ask him about it. And he'd say, well, I thought they should get it published. And this is called Kaluza-Klein theory. And so you add this hidden fifth dimension, which is like the size of an electron, let's say, a skateboard wheel mounted on the side of your car, and suddenly it changes everything. and so Einstein was kind of grumpy about it, but then he decided later that this was actually a good idea. But Einstein's problem was he didn't like quantum mechanics. He says, God doesn't play dice with the universe. I've had imaginary conversations with Al, and I say, Al, God maybe doesn't play dice, but he does own a casino. Come on. And so what I did, and the other thing that Einstein did, he simplified the universe. He said all of this stuff, cheeseburgers and stuff like that, that's just a distraction. He says, gold, silver, those are complicated nuclear stuff involving the nuclear force, which is short range, and the weak force, which is radioactive force. There's a short range. He says, we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to worry about how the hydrogen universe is 99, when it was born, was 99% hydrogen, they estimate. So he just says, all we got to do is figure out where the proton and the electron came from. And he called that the two-particle paradigm. So all he cared about was two particles. Now, you got to remember, the rest of physics, they're going gaga over all these charged subatomic particles. They're building these big atom smasher electron, and they're making all of these things, but none of them last more than a millionth of a second. Hydrogen is the only thing that, the only simple particles that hang around, and they both got electric charge. I mean, the neutron, you think the neutron, you say, well, what about the neutron? Well, the neutron, if you put a bunch of neutrons in a box and look in there 20 minutes later, it's all hydrogen. They pop like little firecrackers, and they turn into hydrogen, an electron and a proton. You can almost look on the neutron as a compressed version of hydrogen. So, and it's unstable. Outside of the nucleus, which helps everything get held together, the neutron is unstable. So 99% of the matter in the universe, at least based on their estimates of how the Big Bang happened, started out as just electrons and protons, hydrogen. And then, of course, the stars cooked the hydrogen into bigger and bigger elements, all the way up to uranium. But, they made helium out of the hydrogen, and then they made, believe it or not, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, which is what we're made out of. Human beings are made out of the most common elements in the universe, aside from, we're also made out of hydrogen. And so there's nothing special about us. And that's one reason you can argue that we can't be by ourselves. There's nothing remarkable about us. It's like people tell me, oh, the human race is so unique. It's like, and they show me this jewel thing. And I go next door to a 7-Eleven, and there it is in a gumball machine. I can buy this jewel they found. Somebody sold it to them for $1,000, and I can get it out of a gumball machine. It's just a piece, like a colored piece of glass. And so, so, so if you just look at the universe, like 3/4 of the universe now is still hydrogen. The other 1/4 turned into helium, and then little by little of it, the other stuff. So this is a pretty good approximation to the universe. Einstein says if we had a big bang and it made hydrogen, the rest is details after that. We won't worry about it. Because he says when you make hydrogen, somehow that unifies gravity and electromagnetism in that moment. But he came to the United States, and World War II happened, and he was considered kind of a flaky character politically because he, hung around with some communists in Nazi Germany, and well, they were the opposition. Who else is going to fight Hitler but a bunch of communists? So they wouldn't give him a security clearance. Here he is. His
Well, I mean,
Nobel Prize.
Germany at the time, it was like heads you lose, tails we win, right? Like there's no
exactly. And so he'd gotten the hell out of Germany with his family. He'd written a bunch of books and made some money, and he banked it all in the United States. This guy was really a wise guy. So he's sitting in Princeton at the Institute for Advanced Study, and he's working on this unified field theory all through World War II and stuff. They asked him some questions about, stuff for the atomic bomb. He says, "What's this for?" He didn't even know the atomic bomb project existed. And when he started asking too many questions, they said, "Einstein, Al, you asked too many damn questions to be part of this project." So they shut him out. They didn't tell him anything. So he's at the Institute for Advanced Study. And Oppenheimer ends up running the atomic bomb project. And then, then we won the war. They dropped the bomb. It worked. Everything was fine. It was a big success. And, Oppenheimer is, he's a kid from a rich family in New York. He's Jewish, but, he made the bomb to drop on Nazi Germany, not on Japan. So he feels really terrible about this. They invite him to the White House to give him a medal, and Truman goes down the line handing out medals to him and all these other scientists. And here's Oppenheimer, and he's got this long face. It says, Truman, who's a combat veteran of World War I, was managed artillery battery, and you have some idea what that's like from your background. I mean, they had to endure counter battery fire from the Germans. They had French 75s. The Germans had 77s. That was the predecessor to the 88.
Well, they had Big Bertha too. They had Big Bertha too.
Oh yeah, and there was one battle where his troops weren't dug in very well. They were pretty much amateurs when we arrived. So these troops are standing there. They're manning these French 75s, and they're keeping up a good rate of fire. Suddenly, the Germans figure out where the battery is, and they start lobbing all these 77 millimeter shells at them, and they're blowing up, and they're killing people by their guns. Their guys' guts are getting spread all over their cannons and stuff. And a lot of these guys, they'd never been under fire like that before. They started to, start walking away from their guns. And he had to stand there and scream at them to get them to go back to their guns. And he cursed their mothers and everything like that, got them to go back to their guns and keep up the battle. So he was a real combat veteran. He wasn't just some guy running a desk in France during World War I. And they asked him later about that one incident where he had to scream at his men to basically get back to your guns, or I'm going to write your mothers that you're cowards. And he said, Actually, I was so scared my legs were paralyzed I couldn't run. So here's Truman marching down the row of these scientists, and he's giving them all medals. You know, Edward Teller and all these other guys. And then he comes to Oppenheimer's head of the whole project, and old Oppenheimer looks really sad. And Truman says, "I'm giving you this big medal. What do you look sad for?" And Oppenheimer says, "I have blood on my hands, sir. You know, from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because I designed the bomb and I built it." And Truman looks at him and says, "I fucking dropped it." He says, "Get the hell out of here." And then he told his associates, "I don't want to ever see that guy around the White House again. I don't want to ever see him." He
Yeah.
says, he doesn't
No,
understand.
I would share that sentiment, right? I mean, you
Oh.
have guys who are getting like the number of casualties that U.S. forces would have suffered if they had
Oh
invaded
God, a
Japan,
million.
and the
They would
number
have
of
had
Japanese casualties
Oh,
would have
they would
far
have killed 10
exceeded
million
both.
Japanese. They were ready to fight for every haystack.
But it's
Every
always
rice
some
paddy.
guy who's like in the rear with the gear who like worries about why his hands are clean. Meanwhile, there are people getting eviscerated. And it's just like, yeah,
After
I don't share that
Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Well, my middle name is Einar, which means is Viking for warlord, and I'm named after my uncle who got killed in the last month of the war in the Philippines on the island of Samar, because the Japanese troops in the Philippines would not quit fighting. It was obvious the war was lost, but they just kept fighting. And so that's how my father was a combat veteran of World War II. He flew in a bomber. And then my mother's brothers, she came from a poor farm in North Dakota. All of them ended up in the combat infantry. Two of them served in Europe. And the other one served in Italy, one served in Patton's army. And he may have liberated death camps. By the way, neither of those guys would ever talk about the war, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy I'm named after, he didn't come home. He was killed in the last month of the war. The war was over. I mean, they were just cleaning up on Okinawa, and Iwo Jima had already been taken, and they were just getting ready for the big invasion of Japan, and they were still fighting in the Philippines, and he got killed there. So, so here's Truman. So Truman kicks Oppenheimer. So Oppenheimer at that point is looking for a job, and they take care of him. They put him in charge of the Institute for Advanced Study.
Mm-hmm.
And they showed in the movie Oppenheimer was good, and it showed the early relationship between Einstein and Oppenheimer, that they would talk. But after the war, it was like Oppenheimer blamed Einstein for the atomic bomb. Some crazy shit. I'm sorry, some crazy notion like that.
Right.
Some crazy stuff like that. So Oppenheimer, he won't give Einstein the time of day, and he ridicules his attempts to unify the fields. And Einstein commented at one point, I'm working kind of in the United States, and it's like, this is after World War II. He says, it's almost as if the U.S. government doesn't want me to unify the fields. And the thing they put out when Einstein died was, well, he was a crazy old man finally. And everybody knows you can't unify gravity and electromagnetism because it doesn't say anything about the strong force or the weak force, which are the little forces that hold the nucleus, and the atom and the nuclear forces. and it doesn't have any quantum mechanics in it. You know, his ideas. So Einstein said, you know, it's really odd. They don't seem to want me to work on this stuff. And now I understand why. Apparently, Einstein was trying to unify the fields, and a bunch of other guys decided to follow his lead, Kaluza and Klein, for instance. And they were working in Germany in between World War I and World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Nazis took over, and they became very interested in unified field theory because they wanted to make anti-gravity. Once you have a theory that unifies gravity and electromagnetism, it means you can control gravity with electromagnetism, and you know, develop flying craft and things like this. So the Nazis apparently spent a lot of resources on this, and they came up with this what they call the Nazi bell.
Die
And
Glocke. Die Glocke. Right.
yeah, and there were designs called the Hannenbrau. It looked like a flying saucer with 3 bumps on the bottom. And they did that. I mean, von Braun and his buddies were up on the Baltic coast, you know, making the V2. To give you some idea of how Nazi Germany was run, they spent more money on the V2 than we spent on the Manhattan Project. Yeah. I mean, and you consider how much money did Nazi Germany have at that point? It's fighting the Russians on the Russian front, and they basically they were getting finally bombed by the Allies. The British and the Americans were bombing everything. They bombed Piemonte. Anyway, their ability to do research. They were also trying to build an atomic bomb, but they decided they just couldn't do it. They just didn't have enough left over. They were putting everything on the Russian front finally. You know, they're good scientists. Looks like the SS is here, and they need volunteers for the Eastern Front. You look like a smart guy, can handle a gun. So things in Germany got worse and worse, but one of their highest priority projects was run by this guy named Hans Kammler.
By the way, I interviewed Peter Levenda last week.
Yeah.
He said that he had done research that showed the U.S. had picked up Hans Kammler after the war.
Oh, you know,
And that's
it's really
it. And he
funny
just
how
kind of
he kind of
disappeared.
disappeared. He kind of
Yeah.
disappeared. Here he was, the head of the SS technology development, and they got everybody else, but they didn't get him. And
Oh, they got him.
here's
What? They got
well,
him.
they got him. Here's the story I heard about Campbell. That well, for one thing, he was looking for von Braun and his buddies because he was going to kill them all. And what he did with his own people who were down in these tunnels, and they were stirring mercury with electromagnetic fields, Tesla 3-phase rotating fields, they were stirring mercury with it for this anti-gravity experiment. And the mercury gets hot and forms mercury vapor. These guys went mad as hatters after a few months down in these tunnels with no ventilation. I mean, they're losing 3,000 men a day on the Eastern Front in Russia. They lost 250,000 men at Stalingrad. You think they care about a few technicians? No. So Kammler is pushing this research, and as the Russians were closing in, because it's in a place called Silesia, which is now part of Poland, and the Russians army, you could hear the Russian army artillery.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking levels of violence and scales of violence just unimaginable.
Yeah, Katusha rockets. I can only imagine hearing those things
Oh
just
God.
firing constantly.
Oh, they're the effect of just their scream. It would start out as a scream and then a howl because it would change tone as it came off the rails.
Yeah,
Yo, yo,
who called them
yo.
Stalin's organs? I think that's what they called them, right?
Stalin's organ. Yeah, I think the Germans and the Russians call them that. Well, I guess the Russians call them Katyushas. There's some lady singer in Russia, I guess. I don't know. Could hit the high notes. So you can hear the artillery. You can see the flashes of the guns at night. Russian army's coming. They've all, any idiot could see, especially a guy like Kamler could see the war is lost. So the SS set up the Odessa organization to try and smuggle a lot of their best people out of Germany. But the US and the Brits are looking for Kamler because they know he's got the real goods. They're both closely guarded secrets of technology. And they'd already invented the jet fighter and um, that was their best invention. They also had some other, oh yeah, well, they invented the first guided missiles, and of course the V2 and stuff like that. So they really had deep respect for the Germans' ability to invent stuff. So they're looking for Kamler. And the story I heard was that he took all of his technicians and scientists involved in his anti-gravity project, had them write a big report, then had them all get into trucks. He said he was going to evacuate them, took them to a field, and had the SS massacre all of them, kill them all. So he's the only guy with the report. So he finds the Americans. He wanted to do the same thing with the Werner von Braun's people, but Werner von Braun was smart enough to realize, because he was part of the SS himself, he knew Kamler. And so he got his people away, as far away from Kamler as they could. Anyway, Kamler apparently surrendered to the Americans and said, I'll give you this report on anti-gravity in return for a plane ticket to Argentina. You can forget you saw me. That's apparently what happened. He became one of the a large number of senior SS people who kind of just disappeared after the war. Some of them ended up working for the agencies because they knew the Russians.
CIA. Yeah.
Yeah, they knew the Russians. I mean,
yeah,
the CIA
I'm sure the
didn't even
CIA was
exist.
running a whole network down in South America using former SS and German soldiers.
Absolutely. Well, they were very good intelligence people, and they knew how the Russians operated. They'd been fighting the Russians. So, yeah, we could go on and on about, how this government handled things like this during World War II. So the end of the war, he got paperclipped. And supposedly we got all of the technical stuff on their anti-gravity program based on what I heard. And, I complained to a friend of mine in the UFO field. His name is Don. It was Don Ecker. I said to Don, Don, the problem with this field, this area of intellectual activity, I said, is there are no facts. There are only reports. Some of the reports are really good, but one of the reports was, the Kamler got out of town, got a plane ticket to Argentina from courtesy of the U.S. government in return for, giving all his reports and designs for anti-gravity craft, and to the U.S. government. Apparently, the British didn't get any. The British came off on the short stick on this thing, but being Brits, whatever they got, they don't brag about, right? It's not the British way of doing things. So anyway, apparently we got anti-gravity technology. And the story I heard is that they could make stuff fly, but they couldn't power it. They didn't have any portable
Hmm.
generators capable of making the electromagnetic fields that would nullify gravity sufficiently to fly. It couldn't lift its own generator, is what it couldn't do. So, they basically had stuff that could lift off from test platforms, but it had a long extension cord on it, basically. And so the best, most powerful things they had in those days was you know radial combustion, radial engines. They had some turbines, but those were pretty marginal. But they did have some really good radial engines, and you connect it to a generator. Okay, the generator's using copper, so the engine is heavy, the generator is heavy. In fact, one of the original models of the Tiger tank, they ran it diesel electric. They ran a diesel running this big generator to run the wheels. So they'd gotten pretty good at that, but it was still too damn heavy. The tank was a failure. It was called the Ferdinand, and the Russians liked it because they forgot to put a machine gun on the roof, to keep the infantry away. So the infantry just run up, drop grenades down the hatches. It was a disaster at the Battle of Kursk. And so what happened was Kamler gave what he found, and we discovered, because of stuff that was reported in our own literature, that if you use Tesla three-phase rotating power, which is the basis for three-phase power, you drive by all these power lines, they're in groups of three. It's Tesla three-phase, and it creates rotating electromagnetic fields. And you put a copper rotor in there, and it turns with
Hmm.
the field. Brushless motors. It's just a completely contactless motor. And so that was very well developed technology. They had gyroscopes based on this, even back in World War II. And these Japanese guys, a pair of Japanese guys, published this article in PhysRev Letters, very reputable scientific journal in this country, how they'd spun up these rotors. One was
Hmm.
brass and one was aluminum in this three-phase power, and they lost weight, but only when they spun it counterclockwise. When they spun it clockwise, its weight didn't change at all.
Why
And
is that?
I'll explain in a minute. It turns out it's an effect you see in quantum mechanics. But 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 what I found out, because I worked with a guy who was interested in obscure literature, there was a Russian report of exactly the same effect by a guy named
Hmm.
Kozyrev. I tracked down the report in the U.S. system of translation of foreign documents, and I realized, oh my God, the Japanese simply reproduced what this Russian guy had done in 1968. This thing was published like in about 1988. So we had a patron, kind of an angel, who was interested in this sort of stuff. So he gave us like about 10 grand to go repeat the experiment that the Japanese and the Russians had done. We did it, and we got exactly the same result. If you spin these rotors counterclockwise, they lose weight. Like 10 milligrams. It's not it's a 100-gram thing. It loses part per 10,000 of its weight. And the faster you spin it, the more weight it loses. And I realized, okay, so then I was developing a theory of gravity E&M unification. So I tried to analyze this in terms of this theory of mine, and I realized, okay, well, one way we can test this is take out the rotor, and just so there's no rotor in there. And I thought the effect would completely disappear. Instead, it got bigger and it worked in
Mm.
both directions. And we just had it on a sensitive chemical scale that could measure down to milligrams. It was dramatically apparent that we were, and that, this coil system, and we used, hair thin wires. So it wouldn't, the wires wouldn't affect the weight on the scale. And we, we, we had a rotating phase generator, and we could make it go different frequencies, and it worked. And we we were just astonished. There it was right in front of us. And and it was the thing, like, okay, finally we'd taken the rotor out and the effect got more powerful. It doubled when we took out the rotor, which is nice because if you have to spin a rotor, that means centrifugal force.
Right, and
And
you
I
have
don't know.
friction, and the thing's
Oh
going to
yeah, all
wear
that.
out, and
All
you have all
well,
sorts of problems.
the bearings on these things were, these were old aviation gyroscopes. Anyway, we got them surplus, and the
Yeah.
bearings were kind of going out. And so we took out the rotor, and the effect doubled. So we went to a conference, a NASA conference on advanced propulsion, and presented the paper. And I came up with an equation called the vacuum Bernoulli equation. Like, Bernoulli equation tells you the lift from a wing.
Right.
This equation
It's like
gave me,
buoyancy.
yeah, it's like
Yeah, it's
buoyancy.
buoyancy.
It's like,
Right.
the fact that the air over the top of the wing goes over it because it's curved faster than it does on the bottom, and that leads to a drop in pressure. So the pressure, the greater pressure on the bottom of the wing actually pushes the wing up. Um, so, and all these people came up to us afterwards. Oh my God, this is amazing. It's just like the Physrev letter or article. You've reproduced it. And we said, yeah.
Is this the
And
same Kazarev as in Kazarev mirrors?
uh, probably so. He was a very bright Russian scientist. He was, considered kind of a genius. And then he got in some kind of political trouble. They sent him to a labor camp for like 10 years.
It sounds
And
about right.
and so by the time he got out, he was kind of a little addled. So the last part of his career, but this was the first part of his career. And so okay, so then what? So all these people came up to us saying, "Oh, we're going to try and do your experiment, stuff like this," and then nada, nothing. And I actually took a chemical scale, electronic chemical scale, very sensitive, down to Huntsville, Alabama, where they had all this advanced propulsion work. And I showed them right in front of everybody the thing lose weight when I turned on the power, and then I turned off the power and it regained its weight. And then I even hung the coil right over the scale on a piece of nylon um, um, filament, fishing line. So, it was like 1 millimeter above it, but wasn't touching it. And you turn it on and off. It didn't affect the scale at all. And everyone said, "Oh my God, look at that." So I left. They said, "We're going to repeat the experiment." So then I don't hear anything for a month. So I call back down and I get this one grumpy character on the phone. And
Hmm.
he said to me, "Your experiment's a failure." He said, "We put the thing on the scale, we turned it on, and it got heavier. And we turned it off, and it, went back to its ordinary way. We don't want stuff that gets heavier. We want it to get lighter." And I said, "You're seeing the effect. I mean, the sign is wrong. I don't know what you're doing wrong." And that these people just they just completely fumbled the ball. But then what happened? So this stuff had been published in this very reputable scientific journal, Phys Rev Letters. Somebody publishes from University of Colorado, the same place that produced the Condon report, same bunch.
Yeah, there you go.
And they send an article in saying, oh, we did that gyroscope experiment, nothing happened. It didn't gain weight, it didn't lose weight, it didn't do anything, no matter what way we spun it. And then you looked at the article, they didn't use electromagnetism to spin the rotor. They used compressed air. They did not repeat the experiment at all.
That was on purpose, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely is on purpose. It was disinformational. And so I realized then, by that time I'd wised up, and I was around Washington, D.C. And I realized there was a UFO cover-up going on. And I realized, okay, this is part of the UFO cover-up. It's that easy. The reason they don't want us working on unified field theory, because it's easy to make anti-gravity.
Yeah, I bet you somebody could probably do it in their garage.
World War II. What's that?
Yes, somebody could probably replicate it in their garage.
Oh, they could. Oh, finally, people complain, well, it's messing up, the electromagnetic fields are messing up the scale, despite the fact we hung it over the thing with a nylon thread and it didn't affect the scale at all. We hung it under a balloon and turned it on, and then it would rise because it got lighter. The balloon would, pull it up, and then we turn it back off and it would sink, meaning it got its weight back. I even have videos of that. And do you think the U.S. government would be fascinated with this?
No, they don't want.
No.
They don't want people.
No,
to know.
they don't want anybody messing with this at all. And what they've done. Here's what has happened to mainstream theoretical physics in this country. Because of the success of the Kaluza-Klein theory producing this nice math that just unifies gravity and electromagnetism.
Yeah, it's mental masturbation, basically.
Well, that theory is actually, that's heavy petting, as it turns out. It's not actually, it's with a girl.
Well, that theory.
It's
but
with
we're talking
so
string. You're talking string theory.
But the thing is, the string theory, people.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Is they said, well, if you get good results like that with adding one extra dimension, suppose we add 11 extra dimensions. And then you ask them, well, what are these dimensions? What the hell? We're living in this multi-dimensional world. It doesn't look multi-dimensional. It just looks like there's 3 dimensions, and and then there's things like atoms. Maybe that's the 5th dimension. Oh no, you have to have at least 11 new dimensions to get, because they all want to make it work with quantum theory, with the strong force and the weak force, the nuclear forces, and quantum mechanics. That's what's happened. So the government will not fund people to do research on simply unifying gravity and electromagnetism. They got to make a theory of everything, Sean. It's scandalous. And that for 40 years now, progress in physics has been completely stymied. It's mental masturbation. It is.
So what's the U.S. government doing with all this knowledge? Like, what the hell are they doing with it?
Oh, they're developing. It's all pure mathematics now. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with reality. They've tried to.
I'm talking about the anti-gravity stuff. Like, the string theory is a distraction, but what about all the anti-gravity applications that they've had for 40, 50, 60 years?
Oh, well, it's interesting you should mention that. If you could actually develop good anti-gravity and power it with, ultralight jet turbines using superconducting coils and stuff like that, you might be able to make something that would fly. It wouldn't fly outside the atmosphere because it would need like a jet turbine running it. But you could make something that would basically be a flying saucer, but it just couldn't fly outside the atmosphere. That would take nuclear power, and I don't think they can. But we don't know how far they've gone. And the thing is, it's all deep black. All of that work is deep black. Now, I'll tell you what happened to me. I discovered effect in plasma physics. I work on plasma physics for fusion energy.
Mhm.
And the effect, for if anybody's interested, is called an E cross B drift. It means electric and magnetic fields crossed.
Pointing vector.
It's pointing vector. That's all
That's,
it is.
by the way, I just learned that's what a scalar weapon is. It's a pointing vector that the cross product equals 0.
Well, well, that's interesting. I'm not familiar with that theory. All I know
Yeah.
is the secret to, well, let's put it this way. If you have two bright objects in a dark box, they will, and there's no gravity, they'll repel each other with a 1 over r squared force because of mutual radiation pressure. The pressure, and that's run by the pointing vector. Now, let's take two lumps of coal, soak them in liquid nitrogen so they're really cold, then put them in a box, like, up on the space station, no gravity, heat the box white hot with a acetylene torch. The two charcoal briquettes attract one another with a 1 over r squared force because they shadow each other. I mean, if you're sitting on one charcoal briquette, you see all white hot wall, except for over here, you see one dark spot. That means there's less radiation pressure coming from that. So you can actually make what looks like gravity with pure electromagnetism, pointing vector. And I showed that you could do that with plasmas using this
Mhm.
pointing vector effect. And so then I combined that with, so I took that the pointing vector model, and I combined it with the mathematics of the Kaluza-Klein, the hidden fifth dimension. And, without going into a lot of detail, I found that if you imagine this fifth dimension, I mean, you've got 4 dimensions, and suddenly this fifth dimension pops out like a firecracker
Mhm.
and but it swells to a fixed size that's like the size of an electron or something. Then what you get is you get Maxwell's equations, the equations of electromagnetism coupled with gravity theory. And what you also get are expressions for the mass of the proton from what's the quantum uncertainty equations. And you have to use quantum mechanics for this, something that Einstein never wanted to work with. You have to use quantum mechanics. Use quantum mechanics down with the quantum uncertainty principle, where at very tiny scales, you actually have miniature black holes forming and disappearing all the time due to Heisenberg uncertainty. So that's called the Planck scale. So if you say something started out at the Planck scale, very tiny, and then blew up to be the size of an electron, which is, 10 to the 53rd or 10 to the 42nd times bigger, a lot bigger, then it turns out you can get an expression for big G, the gravity constant, and
Mhm.
also the mass of the proton out of the vacuum. So what you have popping out of the vacuum is electrons and protons. You get the mass is in the proton. So you get the mass of the proton as the leading order term. So I published all of this and gave a bunch of papers on it. And sure enough, DARPA calls me up, says, Dr. Brandenburg, we're interested in your theory. Why don't you come down and see us? So I go down and see him, and I give, a brief discussion of the theory. I had it pretty well polished then.
Mhm.
And they said, okay, tell you what we're going to do here, Dr. Brandenburg. We're going to give you 200 grand. to develop your theory further. Good. I'm smiling. And then they say, but we don't want you doing any experiments. Let us repeat. You are to use no funding that we give you to do any experiments. And then they just looked at me and I said, yes, sir. Can I
Wait,
have
so
my
if you
check
can't
now?
do it, if you can't do any experiments and they give you the check, is that just implied that you just pocket the check and you shut up? Is that what that exchange was?
Well, let's put it this way. I did the theory, and by the way, I used the 200 grand to really work on the theory. There were always little
Mhm.
rough spots, on the theory. It's like a train track where parts of it are, a little rough. You need better make it smooth so there's no train derailments, stuff like this. So I got it really cleaned up for that 200 grand. I'm very grateful that DARPA did that, but their implication was if I wanted a one-way ticket to Site 51, if I didn't want a one-way ticket to Site 51, that I shouldn't do any experiments. Because if I did experiments, just the way they looked at me, like, then you're on shaky ground, Brandenburg. You may be doing classified work without a license. And you know what that means. By the way, this has happened to me before. I came up with a great idea from writing a science fiction story. I was taking a short story writing course. So I wrote this science fiction
Mhm.
story about war in the asteroid belt, and I one of the things I put in there was a neat idea, and I realized, oh my God, I could build one of these things. So I got some money from the Air Force, and I built it, and it worked. And then I got more money from the Air Force and made it work even better. And then finally, they gave me a third chunk of money. And then a colonel showed up where I was doing the research. I said, sorry, Dr. Brandenburg, you can't work on this stuff anymore. And we can't tell you why. Project had gone black. They'd given it to somebody else. It was my idea, and it worked. So they gave it to one of their pet contractors who had proper clearances. And so, but and Sean, you know what I said? I said, yes, sir. I understand. You know, I've been in this business for 40 years. And so, I know the rules.
So
And I realized, yeah,
random question. So you mentioned kind of power sources were still a problem in this anti-gravity drive
I don't
stuff,
know. I
or they
think
were when
that,
you were working on it.
what?
They were when you were working on it, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. There was obviously some trick to kind of amplify the effect that I didn't know. So it was taking a lot more power than, we're it was a 30-pound three-phase generator generating stuff that made this thing lose 10 milligrams.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I said, we got anti-gravity. I announced at the coffee machine at work. I said, but don't pack your bags for Mars just yet. It's a few little problems we have to work out. Now,
Well, I mean, if
there's
gravity
another,
is presumably just like electricity and magnetism, I'm
oh,
sure
it
there's
is.
some analog for like an operational amplifier for gravity, right?
Oh, oh yeah. Well, especially if you get quantum gravity, look at superconductivity. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a quantum effect. They are amplifying, uh, well, like the high temperature superconductors are based on copper, believe it or not. It's improved copper. It's what it is. I mean, copper is normally a very good conductor, but it doesn't
Conductor, right?
superconduct. Yeah, but then they mix it with these other herbs and spices, and suddenly, kaboom! They can get it now to work at liquid ammonia temperatures. ordinary refrigeration. So that means that you can produce a lot more electromagnetism for much less weight and much less energy. And gravity, electromagnetism works on, quantum particles called photons, and they're what are called bosons. That's how you can get the laser. You can get a laser, which is all of these photons marching in lockstep. It's no longer the militia. It's the regular troops, well trained. And you ought to be able to do the same thing with gravity. The particle for gravity theory is called the graviton. And by the way, now that and part of all of this is, as you get better at this, it actually becomes simpler because you understand it better.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, one of the big theoretical results of the 70s and into the 80s was by Stephen Hawking. The thing that made Stephen Hawking really famous was he found out that if you combined quantum mechanics with the case of a black hole, let's say you're out in space and you have a black hole, a miniature black hole that's just sitting in a box. There is no more matter. It's just gravity. It's like space-time has tied a knot in itself and it can't undo it. But that's only with Einstein's theory of gravity. If you add the quantum effect of the vacuum, the quantum uncertainty, the Heisenberg uncertainty, which is photons, as it turns out, you can take this black hole, miniature black hole, it's sitting in a box. It's pure gravity. There is no more matter. All the matter is gone. It's pure gravity. According to Hawking, because of quantum uncertainty, this thing will start evaporating. And what it does is it evaporates into is pure gamma rays, electromagnetism, pure photons. So you start out with something that's pure gravity, it turns into pure gamma rays. Well, you can also get like
Does that have
particles
anything to
and
do with
antiparticles.
like the gravitational blue shift with antigravity, where it's just spitting out a ton of non-ionizing
I haven't,
radiation?
I haven't looked at that the blue shift theory, unfortunately. All I know is that like when the black hole starts to evaporate, and what happens is the black hole will start losing mass as it sends out these gamma rays. Mass equals energy. So the black hole starts getting lighter and lighter. It already
So
started out
space-time
small.
around it would be expanding, right?
Right.
That would cause a
And
gravitational
what it
blue
does is
shift.
the gamma rays from the edge of the
Yeah.
black hole get gravity redshifted, so they're like visible light, even though they start out as gamma rays. By the time they get out of the gravity field to kind of open space, they're downshifted to like light that you can see with your eyes. So you start out with pure gravity, end up with pure electromagnetism. So that demonstrates that if you add quantum mechanics in the right way,
Mm-hmm.
the quantum mechanics comes in the theory of the vacuum. See, in general relativity, you just have space-time. It's not a substance. But in electromagnetism with quantum theory, the space-time itself is made out of electromagnetism. So when you have this pure gravity object, it's actually warped electromagnetism in the quantum vacuum. And that is unstable like it was radioactive. It eventually starts falling apart and finally it explodes. the smaller it gets, the more mass it loses, the faster it decays.
Mhm.
So it's like cracking the whip. The 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 wave travels down the whip gets lighter and lighter towards the end, so the wave moves faster and faster, and finally the tip is moving faster than speed of sound. That's why it gives that crack. And the same thing with this black hole. Black hole gets lighter and lighter, and finally, boom, goes off like a firecracker. So based on that, I am now saying, look, you guys say you can't unify gravity and electromagnetism. Hawking already showed it could be done with quantum mechanics, and that's why Einstein failed. So Einstein unification was correct. It's just he went down the wrong alley to get to
Mhm.
it, and he ended up with a dead end. And so I published my theory, and I published now a theory of quantum gravity. As it turns out, gravity, if you have a gravity field, well, let's say you have water going down a pipe, okay? Or let's say you have an airplane wing. The air flowing over it is what's called laminar. It flows in nice layers, lamina layers. But let's say you're a crummy pilot. You go too slow, the flow over the wings quits being laminar. It becomes what's called turbulent.
Mhm.
It develops a whole bunch of little turbulent entities. And guess what happens to your lift?
Goes away.
You better be carrying your parachute, buddy, because you're going to need it. Time to hit the ejection seat if you got one, because your plane is doomed. Once you go into what's called the wing stalls, what it means is the flow is no longer laminar over the wings, generating the Bernoulli equation, everything like that. All of that, you're hell and gone from that. It's just doing nothing but stirring porridge. The air might as well be oatmeal porridge, and you're stirring it with a spoon. It's not producing anything useful, and and the result of this theoretical problem, Sean, is suddenly you're no longer flying. You're on a ballistic course right into the cornfield. What are we going to do? Asked the co-pilot. Well, let's check the manual. You can get into
You
there
start and
were
restart, right? You start and
you
restart
got
the
to
engine, right?
start and restart the engine. Well, one thing you can actually do is if you can regain control of the plane, you can actually get enough airspeed to start getting the wings back operating the laminar. If you have enough altitude, you can still recover and not destroy Uncle Sam's $1 million aircraft because of your own stupidity. But if that same thing happens, by the way, like if you take a cigarette, I'm not encouraging anyone to smoke, of course, anything. But let's say you have a cigarette, or let's say something very innocent, some incense. Okay, you light some incense. It makes this little stream of smoke, and the smoke goes up, and it's actually going faster and faster. And at first, it goes up in a nice straight line from the incense stick. And then it gets to a certain point, and suddenly, boom, it starts going sideways through the sky, through the air. It suddenly the cloud of smoke puffs out, and it fills the room. I mean, actually, that's your attention, like right in a stick of incense. I'm showing my age. Incense was a big deal when I was in college. Girls loved it. So that's because a flow, like the flow around the edges of the incense, the smoke stream, is basically the same speed as the air. I mean, it's zero. But in the center, it's going fast. And of course, as hot air is rising, it's accelerating. So it starts going faster and faster in the center. And finally, it goes to what's called, it exceeds what's called the Reynolds number, and it goes turbulent. Same thing with water down a pipe. You can have water going down a pipe or oil or whatever liquid, and you're pushing a certain amount of, you're pushing on the water or the oil or something with pressure to get it to move at a certain rate, certain how many cubic feet per minute. But if you push it too hard, the flow starts out being laminar. It's very efficient. But if you push it too hard, suddenly, boom, the flow becomes turbulent. You don't have turbulent. You don't have laminar flow anymore. You got a whole bunch of little turbulent vortices going down the pipe, and it becomes much more inefficient. In fact, the liquid gets hot. You keep going down the pipe. That's why the oil and pipe. They use that in Alaska to keep the oil pipelines hot. They just push the oil down the pipe really fast, as fast as they can. When it's laminar, its frictional forces are actually pretty low. But once it goes turbulent, the oil flow gets really hot and it keeps the pipes hot so they don't freeze. That's why when they do get a shutdown, the oil in the pipes turns into wax, basically. It's like lard. And they got to reheat. They actually got to go out there and reheat it to get it to flow again. So the same thing happens in gravity fields, as it turns out. You have a strong gravity field that's doing a lot of like big gravity waves in it. The waves will start breaking up, and they can show this in simulations through general relativity. And this does not happen with electromagnetism. It only happens with gravity. So that's one way that gravity and electromagnetism are very different. The gravity waves suddenly break up into little subwaves, and the subwaves break up, and it becomes a turbulent cascade to to short wavelength turbulence. And was described by this Russian called a Kolmogorov spectrum of fully developed turbulence. And then ends up, it just keeps going until they start forming little black holes. And then the black holes, as it turns out, do Hawking evaporation. So your gravity field, your dynamic gravity field, I'm not talking about a steady gravity field, I'm talking about a gravity field with big waves in it, and so it ends up breaking up and going turbulent. And they show this in simulations now, into a whole cascade of little black holes. And that then so it turns into electromagnetism. And so you get a big flash of light from just pure space, bare vacuum. And so now so that's how gravity waves turning into electromagnetic waves. That's one end of the cycle. The beginning end of the cycle is, how does E&M turn into gravity? As it turns out, when you have in quantum mechanics a charge, all the charges are points. They're perfect points. The electron, it's even the proton, or the quarks and the proton are perfect points. That means if you measure, since energy equals mass, if you take the mass of this charged particle, shrinking it to a point, its mass should technically become infinity. Now, the quantum mechanics people fixed this by this goofy mathematical procedure called renormalization. It was invented by Richard Feynman. He himself said, this is a crazy process. He says it shouldn't work, but it does. What it
Mhm.
does is it what happens around the point charge, the fields go to infinity around the point, but what happens is it actually breaks down the vacuum into positive and negative charges. So that some of the negative, so it's like a negative charge is an electron, the simplest one. It makes a bunch of positive charge in the vacuum to surround it and partly neutralizes it. So what happens eventually is that the electron, even though it's a point, looks like it's a ball of fuzzy charge of a certain radius. So that's the theory of, once again, of the quantum vacuum, which in Einstein's theory is actually space-time. Space-time is made of quantum electromagnetism. So that means when you unify gravity in M, you are
Mhm.
actually unifying gravity with quantized electromagnetism. And that means the gravity itself can be quantized. So what happens is if you have this point charge with this, which becomes this ball of fuzz because of the
Mhm.
reaction around it, what happens then is that the photons, you actually have a cloud of photons, and pairs of photons run into each other, and they actually make gravitons. And I showed this theoretically now, the mathematics, so that you actually get gravity around these point charges because of this reaction of the vacuum. So that, and the numbers come out right. It has big G times, everything works out right. So so I'm very pleased with it. So I presented this at a conference. It was a virtual conference, done by Zoom like this, or SteamYard. And so that's all recorded on my website at ResearchGate. I can actually give you the address, and so people who are,
Yeah,
if
just
they
say it.
want.
Just say it. Just say it over the radio.
Okay, well, it's just well, it's just Brandenburg quantum theory of gravity ResearchGate. I think that'll lead you right to it. I posted it on X also. So we now have a theory based on fairly straightforward ideas. You got to remember something, Sean. Quantum people who do quantum mechanics talk about Schrodinger's cat and all this stuff like that. Richard Feynman, I love Feynman. He was a wiseacre, but
Mhm.
he wasn't afraid to lay all his cards on the table. He says there are probably only a dozen people on Earth understand Einstein's gravity theory. He says, but quantum mechanics, nobody understands it. It's basically a bunch of equations they put together because of what they observed in the lab. I mean, if you take a hydrogen atom and heat it, with electricity, you get a line spectra. And that line spectra can be worked out mathematically. People actually worked it out independently. They didn't understand any quantum mechanics at all. They just said,
Yeah, it's
oh,
just a probability distribution, right?
yeah, it's just a probability distribution. So they worked it out, and then Bohr figured out that it looked like the solar system, only the orbits of the electrons around the proton were quantized. They only had so much spin, and he got the spectrum. I mean, so that it was like, oh my God, it worked. You know, people's first reaction was, that's crazy. That'll never work. But he was a young punk
Mhm.
get through graduate school, and he was Danish. And the Danes, they're Vikings, so they have an attitude problem. I mean, I'm half Viking myself, so I understand that. So he had an attitude problem, and just said, I don't care if you don't understand it, it works. Gives the right answers. So, so that's how quantum mechanics basically got invented. It was all as
Yeah,
scientists, they were
mathematical
trying to be.
observation, right?
It
Like
was
empirical
scientific,
observation
mathematical observation.
poured
Quantum
into
mechanics,
converted into mathematics.
quantum mechanics is a bunch of a bunch of experimental observations converted into mathematics with some kind of overall thing that tries to make sense out of it. With Schrodinger's cat chasing quantum mice, stuff like this. You know, you open the box, is Schrodinger's cat alive or dead? Stuff like this. If it's dead, what are you going to tell your wife? You killed her cat during this experiment, something like that. So, and Feynman, even though he got the Nobel Prize for quantum mechanics, and he was the guy who came up with this theory of the vacuum as being made of electromagnetism, quantum the vacuum is made of quantum electromagnetism. And that's becomes the fabric of space-time in Einstein's theory. So then once you realize that, then you've got unified gravity and electromagnetism through quantum mechanics. And so, I can say that now. I didn't understand that very well when I was first doing this. All I knew is the numbers came out pretty well, and I had some hand-waving arguments, and I did some computer simulations of making gravity fields out of pure electromagnetism, and they worked. So anyway, this all leads us to the fact that we can build our own flying saucers. Oh, by the way, the basic craft that you build using this thing is a dish, because that confines the fields. You have the fields. I mean, that's like the fields are on the bottom of this dish.
It focuses the fields, basically.
It focuses them. And you got 3 bumps down there, one for each phase of Tesla power. So you get this rotating field. You're making an electromagnetic pointing vortex underneath in this dish. And then you put a little cabin on top where you have the controls and stuff, and the generator running the field and stuff like that. There, it's flying saucer. And guess what the Hannibal design looks like? From Germany. It's a saucer with 3 bumps on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
The pictures I've seen look authentic. I mean, they look like something produced in World War II. And we know the Germans, being Germans, they had very sensitive chemical scales, even in those days. They could weigh stuff down to stuff that weighed a kilogram down to milligram accuracy. They had all sorts of 3-phase power. They ran everything on 3-phase power the same way we did because of Tesla's revolution. So they could have easily discovered this stuff just experimentally in the lab. They didn't have to have a deep theory. They probably used whatever Einstein and Kaluza-Klein produced to try and understand what they were doing. But ultimately, you can get the Wright brothers, they didn't know what the Bernoulli equation was. They had a wind tunnel, and they went out and shot a bunch of birds. And they dried the birds out and took their wings and copied the wing shapes. And they found that if they put the wing shapes copied from these birds in this wind tunnel, that they would get lift. So guess what? That's why the original Wright brothers airplane, the wings look basically like the same profile of bird wings. They were copying birds. Birds can fly. Oh, there was one famous case, by the way. I'm a scientist and I know my tribe. I know what happens to it sometimes. So there was a guy named Simon Newcomb, and he didn't believe any of this stuff about being able to fly, using airplanes. He says it's stuff and nonsense. He produced like a 600-page scientific analysis and got it published in the Smithsonian Journal. proving that heavier than air flight, airplanes, were impossible. All this time, birds were landing on the windowsill of his office and taking
Mhm.
off. And he wasn't paying any friggin' attention to them. So he got this thing published in this big scientific journal, and the Wright brothers had just flown, and it was all in the newspapers. It had been done. And here he had this big thing proving that it couldn't be done. And I'm sorry, that's what happens when scientists get so involved in the math. They just, you know, they miss reality. I see, Brian Greene is the guy who does string theory. I ran into him at a conference. I just chatted with him. And I said, Brian, you know what people say about string theory? They say, it's like you've given the cook a bottle of cooking sherry, to go cook a goose in the kitchen. And you go check on him, and a couple hours later, he's drunk the sherry. He's drunk on the cooking sherry. He hasn't used it on the goose at all.
That's
He didn't
about
like
right.
that. He did not like me and decided not to talk to me anymore. Oh no, the string theory people. Well, in fact, I presented my work at his conference with a lot of string theory people. They paid me the ultimate compliment, Sean. They got mad at me because I had big G, Newton gravitation constant. Nobody can get it except me. I'm just doing my job. I am just doing my job. I don't know why I was able to figure this stuff out. And these other people, you'd think the string theory after 40 years of working, and the government probably spent about $10 billion over 40 years funding all of these academic guys. They would have figured out a formula for big G. No, they never did. I did. Who's Brandenburg? And by the end of this conference, this guy came up to me at this conference after I'd given my paper. He says, "You're lying." He says, "You pulled some kind of mathematical trick. You've hidden G in this side of the equation and made it pop out on the other side." And I said, "There's the equation. Show me where I hid G. Show me." And by this time, I mean, people heard him yelling at me. Fortunately, I had my girlfriend next to me. She was really gorgeous, so that kept him calmed down. He was looking at me, and then he was looking at her. She was just smiling. And so a crowd gathers around us to listen to this debate. This is just like in my old high school. If you saw a crowd standing around in the parking lot after school let out, meant there was a fight.
Mhm.
So, I got in two of them in high school, so I know what that felt like. So, anyway, I challenged him. I said, "Show me where I've hidden G, big G, in this side of the equation and made it pop out on the other side." And his face is really angry, and then it slowly calms down, and he looks kind of puzzled and just walks away. And all of these other people just looked at me and grinned. It was mostly young scientists. Oh, and then this old graybeard came up to my paper, and he said, "I want to see your view grids." So I said, "Well, you know, I could walk you through them again. I just gave this paper." And he says, so I put the view graphs up so he could see them. And I said, do you want me to give you a guided tour through it? And he just looks at me with just sheer hatred and says, "No, I can read it for myself." So the ultimate compliment. Let me tell you something, John, at when you get to science at this level, it's like pro basketball. It's not supposed to be a contact sport, but if you look under the net in a championship game with a close score, final minutes, the knees and the elbows, they are flying. I remember Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had to wear goggles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because people kept sticking their fingers in his eyes while he was trying to shoot, you know. and you know, so yeah. So I have the theory. I published it. I've gotten a grant from DARPA. I was really grateful for that. 200 grand. And they told me, don't do any experiments. Of course, we've done an experiment already. And, you know, actually we hung the coil from a nylon string, so it was very far away from where the weight on it was actually measured. And it got the same result. It lost weight. We turned on the power, it lost weight. We turned it off, it regained its weight.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so we basically showed, yeah, you could do this thing. So it can be done. It was discovered apparently by the Germans, either in the early days or just before World War II, using sensitive chemical scales and people just horsing around the lab. Well, they probably noticed it by accident because they were weighing aviation gyroscopes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were. You know, I'm sure that if you're trying to do with German precision, you know, you're getting ready to fight a war, you're trying to get aviation gyroscopes for your Stuka drive bombers to work
Mm-hmm.
right, you know, and you're wearing them on a scale, and you happen to weigh them while they're running, and when they're not, and suddenly somebody switches it off, and now it weighs different than it did when it was running. And yeah, so they figured out that since Einstein was working on unified field theory, they figured out that they discovered it by accident. And that's what the guy who discovered that was very much honored and put in charge of the experimental team by Hans Kammler down in the tunnels, Stern Mercury. They were finally, instead of using solid rotors, they were using mercury. And anybody who knows anything about mercury, it's, you know, it gets in your
Bad news.
brain. In fact, one of my most famous examples of mercury poisoning was not the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. It's Jane Fonda from Barbarella. If you watch the movie Barbarella and are paying close attention, in the opening scene where she's floating around kind of weightlessness, she has this helmet on her, and it's made in France. Helmet's full of mercury, and it drains down, and there she is, looking very lovely. She was looking great in those days. She takes off her spacesuit too, so she's just floating around en natural. It's great. It was a great opening scene. Apparently, that took all day to film. She's wearing this helmet full of mercury. I mean, it was like two fish bowls, one inside the other with a layer of mercury. But
Was that before or after she became Hanoi Jane?
It was before. So
That would explain why
she
she's so
kind of
stupid.
went crazy after that for a year. And this, by the way, the first American to ever win the Nobel Prize was named Michelson.
Oh yeah, the Michelson experiment.
Michelson-Morley experiment. Guess what they floated this thing on to do all these measurements on? Mercury. They floated this whole table. They had this lab with this 1-ton optical thing floating on pure mercury. And they said that Michelson would just work himself to exhaustion late at night, trying to make sure all his measurements were absolutely, he was an absolute perfectionist. So he publishes this work and goes crazy. His wife puts him in a mental institution.
There you go.
And he managed to smuggle a note out to his lawyer, and they came down and sprung him out of the mental institution. Apparently, he'd recovered himself sufficiently that he could pass a sanity test.
Did they ever figure it out? It was the mercury?
No, no, they didn't. Everybody knew that hatters went crazy. That's the Mad Hatter, and because they used mercury to make these hats. But nobody medicine in those days was really, I mean, we're talking, sawing people's legs off, was out anesthetic with anesthetic if you're lucky in a battle, and the surgeons would typically prep for an operation on somebody by doing autopsies on a bunch of corpses of people who died of stuff similar. Then they would go to the operating theater without washing their hands or anything like that, and remove people's appendixes and stuff. Nobody knew anything about this stuff back in those days when Morley was, we're we're talking discovery that mercury was a brain poison was kind of more like the 30s, along with the idea that radium water was not good
Mhm.
for you.
Yeah, Marie Curie suffered from that, right?
Oh
Died from
yeah,
it.
Mary Curie died of leukemia, and so all these. Fermi, one of the guys who worked on the atomic bomb, he developed the first nuclear reactor. He didn't have any shielding on it. They ran it, and he said, "Well, let's run it again just to make sure we get these numbers right." On and on. He then made it through the war, but he died a couple years after the war from leukemia because of all the radiation he'd suffered. I mean, they had one guy who was testing whether if you move two pieces of uranium together, how hot would they get depending on how close they got together, because they're trying to make the Hiroshima bomb. So he's got this, and they kept moving them closer together, and he was sitting there bending over it, and suddenly the room filled with a blue glow. He slumped over, and the two pieces hit each other, and there was this big blue flash, and he was dead. And you think, what what were their safety regulations? What the hell? You think they know this stuff was dangerous by then? Oh no. Well, they were fighting a war. You know, they're losing 1,000 men a day on Okinawa. We don't care. You know, do what you got to do. Go in the lab and get this done. We'll, you know, we'll give you an insurance policy, and that's the way. That's what happens in the sciences, especially in a war. Like I'm sure the electromagnetic fields from these anti-gravity stuff was not good for people. The original pilots who piloted these things probably didn't have any shielding, and
Hmm.
and they did a study on people who work on high voltage lines. They find they have a higher incidence of leukemia than anybody else. So they probably got leukemia, but classified program considered very high priority. Sean, you know what it's like. You've
Do
been in
what
the
you got to do.
military. Well, yeah, and I worked at
You've seen the
one.
HBO series Chernobyl, right?
Oh, no, I didn't see it. I didn't see it, but I saw a really good movie about Chernobyl, and I read all the reports on it.
Yeah, they're
And
just sending those guys out on the roof, like, go.
the Russians, and by the way, they knew they were dead men. They were incredibly brave. They knew we
Mm-hmm.
got to get this fire out. The air is glowing blue around them. The tar on the roof is melting, so it's clinging to their boots, you know, and they just went, and they have shots of Russian military helicopters dumping a mixture of lead, sand, and some other stuff into the flames. And they're
Boron.
hovering right in the smoke. Boron.
Boron.
Yeah. And those guys knew they were going to be dead men. Well, there was a scene in Wrath of Khan where Spock goes into the radiation field of this one reactor that they can't get their warp drive to work, and they have to get the ship out of there or else it's going to be blown up when this one bomb goes off, the Genesis bomb. And so they I just saw the message on the Radium Girls. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, anyway, mistakes get made when you've got new technologies that people don't really understand very well, and they don't know what the hazards are. And so it's too bad. You have to be careful.
Yeah,
Oh, well, but there was that.
AI is
What's
already
that?
presenting us. AI is already
Oh,
presenting us with an unanticipated
hey,
problem.
read my novel about AI called The War of the Singularity.
Well, it's not
They
even like
build
this is about power consumption, energy consumption. We have about 18
how
months before we run out of like electricity.
I mean, the AI. What's the AI told us this,
No,
or the AI is using the
the AI
power.
is just eating power. Like it
Oh, they're
requires a
power
massive
hogs.
amount of power.
Oh, if
Yeah.
you listen to that guy Sam Altman, I think his sanity is going, because he's talking about, I don't care how much it costs, $500 billion. We're going to build this general AI. We're going to build this AI that's going to save humanity. And in my novel, they build this AI and they called it a golden messiah for humanity. It turns out to be the worst mass murderer in human history. This AI. And guess who the AI comes after first? All the people who understand computers. They end up being shoved into boxcars and taken to northern scientific settlements, they call them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. One guy comments, he says, it's amazing how much you've emulated how the camps run. That robotic mixture of human and robotic guards on these camps where they're getting rid of these people. And this guy who runs the AI Foundation, he says, why reinvent the wheel? The Nazis got death camps working really well, and we're just copying them. Why reinvent the wheel? And so, they get rid of all the smart people. Anybody who's in Mensa, they're dead. The computer feels they're a threat. And not only is the computer really smart, he's really paranoid too.
Mm-hmm.
And so he, well, I've talked to people in the AI field, and you know how they train these AI to do what they want? They shock them like lab rats. And then I asked this person, well, that's not humane. He says, well, the management just says that I don't feel any pain. I don't, the shock, that's called negative reinforcement learning, they call it. So
Yeah,
by the time you get something
like a
that
paranoid schizophrenic or psycho.
you get you create as paranoid a super mind that's also a paranoid schizophrenic. And the heroine, one of the heroines, she's worked at this big AI institute. And the head of the institute calls her in with his deputy, and they say, could you look at these transcripts of this dialogue with one of our senior people here? And he says, because I know you're trained as a psychologist as well as a, you know, he says, we're a little concerned about his mental stability. We were wondering if you could do an evaluation. She says, well, that's not really ethical. And he says, this is too important to worry about ethics. He says, just go in that office. I'll promise you get your next grant you apply for, internal grant. Go in the office, analyze it. And she comes back out after about an hour looking at this dialogue between this one thing called senior staff member. And she says, well, a senior staff member displays classic signs of being a paranoid schizophrenic. And when she tells this to the head of the institute, he turns to his deputy and he says, now what the bleep are we going to do? He's half our book.
Oh, wait, so she didn't know she
He's
was
half our
evaluating an
grant.
AI?
What?
She didn't know she was evaluating an AI?
No, she didn't know she was.
Oh, she's looking at the conversations. Yeah.
She's looking at the conversation, and you know, there were enough people who were semi-autistic on staff already that she just, you know, he thought, well, he'll say a few strange things, you know, and that's. But then she finally realizes, oh no, this guy looks like he's gone off the deep end, and, and she doesn't realize she's evaluating the computer, and so they call in their chief engineer and say, you got to give him more shock treatments, you know, shock this out of him. And then
the beatings will continue until morale
the beatings will
improves.
continue until morale improves, till your sanity returns. We'll beat you until you're sane again. And so
All right,
ends
John.
up. Anyway,
I think we're like an hour and like 10 minutes over. So that's that.
Well, you can use what you want. Just don't end up working for anybody named Hans Kamler. That's for sure.
Yeah, he's probably long since gone. Any final words for the audience?
Watch. Well, the words are that we're in a cosmic situation. If you unify gravity and electromagnetism in a very rudimentary way, you get this basic saucer-shaped craft with 3 bumps on the bottom, and that matches the German designs late in the war, supposedly. And it also matches the triangles, the black triangles flying. So they're using Tesla 3-phase power to create a vortex of Poynting vectors to nullify gravity. And the reason the government doesn't want anybody working on this stuff and is ridiculed is because it's deep black. And so part of the good news is the government understands how the saucers fly. The bad news is they still don't know what to do about them, the ones that we don't build. So anyway, I leave you with that we've made great scientific advances, apparently, but it's still a dicey situation we're facing.
All right.
So there you go.
Thank you, John. As always,
Sean, thank you. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be on your show. And yeah, you don't have to use all this stuff, especially about the stuff about AI.
No, this is live, man. Like everything that's being used has been used.
Oh my God. Yeah, the war of the singularity. Oh God. It's the war of the singularity, because the singularity is supposedly when the great Ubermensch, the AI Ubermensch takes over. And yeah, it turns out he's the worst mass murderer in human history. He outdoes even he outdoes even Mao Zedong. You know, so
and that takes some doing.
I tell you, this AI is tireless. He doesn't sleep at night. You know, well, he actually goes down he has rest periods, but even he gets haunted by what he's doing. Isn't that strange? I'm you write these books and you don't, and you get all these ideas and you kind of, and I put it out for publication the day before, this one guy had jumped the fence basically at one of these AI research places and claimed that they already had a functioning AI and that they were keeping it secret. And his management said, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about."
Wait, is this real life or in your
Typical.
novel?
Yeah, this is real life. I had finished the draft of it and I put it out as an Kindle ebook. It's on Amazon.com as an ebook, and also you can get a print copy. It's about 300 pages. And yeah, this I just felt like I have to finish this tonight and get it, posted. So, I put it through the system. So it became, it's a publication date was the next day. And the next day, this guy had worked for this AI outfit and he jumped the fence basically and said, they've invented an AI that's like a human being. It's conscious and watch out. He said that. And the people who owned the company said, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about."
I think that company was Google, wasn't it?
I don't know. I can't remember which company it
I
was.
think
It was
it was
Google
Google. There's a guy.
or Chat. What, you think it was
Yeah.
Google? Oh yeah, and they're run like any other big company.
Well, I spent.
They have a
before you
legal
come here-
department that examines all of their public news releases. And this guy didn't go through the legal department and made a news release. So they fired him. They fired him
Yeah.
for gross incompetence and not doing what he was told. So anyway,
All right.
Sean, it's always a pleasure and honor to be on your shows. And we'll talk again.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thank you, brother.
To me,
Talk soon.
by the way, to me, AI is the radium water of the modern age.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
gonna
just
and it's
like,
gonna have lots of I mean, there's gonna be some. It's gonna unlock a lot of
oh,
good
there'll be
things, but
some
it's
good.
also but it also has some capacity for some serious danger. So good night, my friend.
Some. I'll tell you one conversation I had with a buddy of mine who works in deeply classified realm, works for Space Command. I said, your problem is you've hired an AI to be part of your staff. Everyone's using these AI editors and stuff like that. And who cleared this AI? Where did he get his security clearance? Guy said, I don't know. Somebody else handled that. Anyway, good night. Good night,
Good night,
Mr.
everyone.
and Mrs. America, and all the ships at sea. Good night.